He paid $300 for a widow and her 7 children. Then the whole frontier learned why she was worth more than gold. The first time Rebecca Whitmore heard the auction bell, she did not think of herself. She thought of 7 small bodies pressed against her coat in the freezing wind. The bell rang across Mercy Crossing, Wyoming territory, sharp and cold, and every sound in the street seemed to stop for it. Wagon wheels slowed. Men outside the mercantile turned their heads. A horse tied near the jail tossed its mane, stamping one hoof against the hard ground. Rebecca stood on the wooden platform with her shoulders straight, though her hands trembled inside her patched gloves. Her old brown dress was clean but worn thin at the elbows. Her dark shawl had been mended so many times that the stitches looked like little roads across the fabric. Snow dusted the edges of her bonnet and melted against her cheeks. She would not wipe it away. She would not let the town see her break. Her children crowded close. Mary, only 13, stood nearest, trying to look grown while fear made her lips pale. Jonah, 11, kept his fists tight at his sides, his chin lifted in a boy's brave imitation of a man. The twins, Peter and Samuel, watched the crowd with wide, silent eyes. Ruth and Annie held each other's hands so tightly their knuckles turned white. Little Ben, not yet 4, hid behind Rebecca's skirt and peeked at the strangers as if one of them might steal him if he looked too long. Rebecca felt every small hand, every frightened breath, every shiver. She had brought them west because the city had no mercy left for them. After her husband died under a collapsed factory roof in Ohio, every door had seemed to close. The landlord wanted rent. The storekeeper wanted payment. The church ladies brought soup twice, then pity grew thin. Rebecca had taken sewing, washing, mending, scrubbing, anything honest. Still, 7 children needed bread every morning. Then came the letter from the Frontier Settlement Society. A new life it promised. Widows may remarry under respectable placement. Children remain with mother when possible. Food, shelter, honest work, and a chance in the West. A chance. That word had carried Rebecca all the way across miles of smoke, mud, rails, and fear. Now that chance stood beneath an auction hammer. Lot 12, the auctioneer called, his voice bored and rough from tobacco. Rebecca Whitmore, widow, age 33, 7 children, ages 3 to 13. Able-bodied, can sew, cook, wash, read, keep accounts, and manage a household. A few men laughed at the last words. Manage a household, one of them muttered. Looks like she already lost one. The crowd chuckled. Rebecca felt Mary stiffen beside her. She squeezed her daughter's hand once, not too hard, just enough to say, "Do not listen." The auctioneer lifted his paper closer to his face. Opening bid is $75. Covers contract fee, transport debt, settlement papers, and custody guarantee for the children. Silence answered him. Not quiet silence. The kind that made a woman feel the whole world had judged her and found her too heavy to carry. Rebecca stared past the crowd toward the gray line of mountains beyond town. She fixed her eyes on them because mountains did not laugh. Mountains did not whisper. Mountains did not look at a mother and count only mouths to feed. 75, the auctioneer said again. No hand lifted. A man in a black wool coat looked her up and down. 7 young ones. No, sir, that ain't a wife. That's a poorhouse with feet. Another man spat near the platform. Too plain, too tired, too much trouble. Rebecca's face warmed, but she kept still. She had been called worse by hunger. She had been insulted by landlords with soft hands and cruel smiles. She had been shoved aside by men who thought grief made a woman weak. She had watched her children pretend not to be hungry so she could take the last biscuit. Words could bruise, but they could not bury her. The auctioneer lowered his voice. $50. Rebecca heard Ruth whimper. Behind the platform stood Mr. Pell, the county placement officer, with a folder under one arm. Beside him waited Miss Harriet Vale from the settlement office, her narrow face tight with duty. Rebecca knew what lay inside that folder. Papers that could separate a family without raising a single hand. Mary to domestic service, Jonah to a cattle outfit, the twins to some farmer who needed field boys. The little girls to church custody, Ben to whichever home would sign. All legal. All clean. All heartless. The auctioneer tapped the handle of his hammer against the stand. If no bid is made, the children will be placed under territorial care by sunset. Ben began to cry. Rebecca bent slowly, though her knees ached from cold and fear. She cupped his face in her hands. "Look at me, sweetheart," she whispered. His little chin shook. "Mama's here," she said. "I am still here. But they said they'll take us." Rebecca swallowed the pain that rose in her throat. "They have not taken you yet." She stood again. The crowd blurred for one dangerous second. She forced it clear. "Going once," the auctioneer called. Mary's fingers dug into Rebecca's glove. "Going twice." Jonah stepped closer to his mother, as if he could shield her with his small body. The hammer lifted. Then a voice came from the back of the street. "I'll pay." It was not shouted. It did not need to be. The voice was deep, rough, and steady enough to cut through the wind. Every head turned. A man stepped out from beside the livery stable, leading a tall black horse by the reins. He wore a dark buffalo coat dusted with snow, a flat-brimmed hat pulled low, and boots scarred by rock and trail. He was broad through the shoulders, with a face weathered by years no town woman had softened. A short gray line marked one side of his beard. His eyes were a pale blue, not gentle, not cruel, but watchful. The crowd moved away from him before he even reached the platform. Someone whispered, "That's Elias Boone." Another voice answered, "The devil from Black Pine Ridge." Rebecca heard the name ripple through the street like a warning. Elias Boone, the mountain rancher, the man folks claimed had buried his past somewhere in the high country. Some said he had killed during the war and never learned how to stop seeing enemies. Some said he had gone wild, living alone among wolves and pine trees. Some said no woman had ever lasted a week near his land. Rebecca looked at him and felt fear settle cold in her stomach. But she also noticed something else. He was not looking at her the way the others had. He was looking at the children. Not with disgust. Not with hunger for control. With a hard, measuring sadness he tried to hide. The auctioneer blinked. "Mr. Boone, you understand the contract includes all 7 children." "I heard you. The debt alone is near $200 with fees." "How much to end it clean?" The auctioneer glanced at Mr. Pell, then back. 300 would clear the balance, papers, and provisions. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Rebecca's breath caught. $300 was not a bid, it was a fortune. Elias Boone reached inside his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. The coins struck the auction table with a heavy sound. Then 300. The town went still. The auctioneer stared at the money as if it had appeared by magic. Mr. Pell stepped forward quickly, suddenly eager. Miss Vale looked from the coins to Rebecca, and for the first time that day, pity touched her eyes. The hammer fell. Rebecca flinched at the sound. "Sold," the auctioneer said. "Marriage and custody contract awarded to Elias Boone of Black Pine Ridge." The word "sold" passed through Rebecca like a blade, but behind her, Ben stopped crying. Elias walked to the edge of the platform and looked up at her. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice lower now, "I won't pretty this up. My place is 2 days into the mountains. It's cold, rough, and lonely. I need help keeping a house, cooking for hired men when spring comes, tending supplies, mending, and reading accounts. Children old enough to help will help. Children too young will be fed anyway. Rebecca searched his face. What do you expect from me? His jaw tightened slightly, as if he respected the question. Work, honesty, courage when the weather turns mean. And my children. They stay with you. Mary made a small sound beside her. Rebecca felt tears press behind her eyes, but she held them back. Hope was dangerous when it came too fast. Why? She asked. For the first time, Elias looked away toward the mountains. Because no paper man should be allowed to break a mother into pieces. The word struck something deep inside her. Around them the crowd whispered. Some laughed nervously. Some looked angry, as if a cruel show had ended before they got their fill. Rebecca lifted her chin. Then I accept. A few minutes later, she signed the contract with a shaking hand. Rebecca Whitmore became Rebecca Boone in black ink that dried too quickly. Her children watched every stroke of the pen like it was a bridge forming beneath their feet. Before they left, Miss Vale caught Rebecca by the elbow. Be careful, she whispered. There are stories about that man. Rebecca looked toward Elias, who was helping Ben into the wagon with surprising care. There were stories about me too, Rebecca said softly. Today they said I was worth nothing. Miss Vale had no answer. By late afternoon, Mercy Crossing faded behind them. The wagon wheels rolled into white hills, and the town became only smoke and judgment in the distance. Rebecca sat with her children under wool blankets while Elias drove in silence. The mountains ahead grew darker, taller, and closer. After a long while, Jonah whispered, Mama, is he a bad man? Rebecca looked at Elias Boone's broad back. At the steady way he held the reins, at the rifle resting beside him, at the snow gathering on his shoulders. I don't know yet, she said. Elias heard her. She knew he did because his hands tightened once. But he did not turn around. The trail climbed into pine shadows. Wind moved through the trees like a warning. Somewhere far off, a wolf called, and little Ben curled against Rebecca's side. Elias finally spoke, his voice carrying just enough for her to hear. Keep the children close tonight, Mrs. Boone. Storm's coming. Rebecca looked at the darkening sky. Above the ridge, black clouds gathered like a secret waiting to fall. And for the first time since the hammer struck, she wondered if the danger behind them in Mercy Crossing had only been the beginning. The first snowflake struck Rebecca's face before Mercy Crossing had fully disappeared behind the hills. They were small at first, soft white specks drifting through the gray air, but Elias Boone kept looking toward the north ridge with a hard set to his mouth. He did not seem like a man afraid of weather. That made Rebecca more afraid of it. The wagon creaked over the frozen trail. The black horse pulled steady, ears flicking back whenever the wind rose. Behind them the town was gone, swallowed by distance and low clouds. Ahead, the mountains waited with dark pine trees climbing their sides like soldiers. Rebecca sat in the wagon bed, with her children tucked around her beneath two thick blankets Elias had thrown back without a word. The blankets smelled faintly of smoke, leather, and cedar. They were warmer than anything she had owned in months. Mary held Ben in her lap and rubbed his little hands between hers. Jonah sat near the wagon's side, trying to watch the trail like Elias did. The boy's face was serious, but Rebecca saw the fear hiding under it. He wanted to be brave because he thought his mother needed a man beside her. It hurt her that a child had ever felt such a burden. Sit lower, Rebecca told him gently. The wind will cut your ears. I'm watching for trouble, Jonah said. Elias' head turned slightly. Trouble usually sees a boy leaning out before a boy sees trouble. Jonah froze, embarrassed. Rebecca expected harshness to follow, but Elias only reached beneath the bench, pulled out a wool cap and tossed it back. It landed in Jonah's lap. Wear that if you're going to play lookout. Jonah stared at the cap as though it were a medal. Then he put it on quickly. Rebecca looked at Elias back. The man had not spoken much since they left town, yet every time he did, his words carried more thought than kindness usually wore on the frontier. Still, she reminded herself that small kindness did not prove safety. Men could hand out blankets with one hand and hold chains with the other. She had learned not to trust too quickly. As the afternoon wore on, the trail narrowed. Wagon tracks grew faint under fresh snow. Pine branches leaned over them, heavy and black against the sky. The air smelled sharper up here, clean and cold enough to sting the lungs. Ruth, who was 7 and usually full of questions, had been quiet for nearly an hour. At last she whispered, "Mama, will there be beds at his house?" Rebecca glanced at Elias, unsure if he would answer. "There are bunks in the loft," he said. "2 downstairs, straw ticks, not feather beds, but they're clean." Ruth thought about that. Do mice live there? Not for long if they're foolish. Peter and Samuel looked at each other, then smiled for the first time all day. Rebecca almost smiled too, but it came and went like a candle in wind. Annie leaned against her side. "Will there be bread?" Elias did not answer right away. The reins shifted in his gloved hands. "There will be flour," he said, "beans, salt pork, dried apples, coffee for your ma, cornmeal if the sack didn't split. I have a milk cow if she hasn't kicked the fence down again." This time Samuel truly smiled. "A cow can kick down a fence." "That cow can." Even Mary's mouth softened a little. Rebecca lowered her eyes. Food, beds, a roof, a cow, such ordinary things, such impossible treasures. She remembered the last room in Ohio, where frost grew along the window frame, and she had scraped burnt porridge from the bottom of a pot so the children could each have one more spoonful. She remembered pretending she was not hungry while Ben licked his bowl. She remembered the way people looked away from poverty as if seeing it might make it contagious. Now a feared mountain man was speaking of dried apples like they were waiting for her children by right. It was almost too much to bear. The wind rose near dusk. It came fast and hard down the pass, sweeping snow across the trail in pale sheets. Elias pulled the horse to a slower pace and leaned forward, eyes narrowed. The wagon rocked, one wheel striking a buried stone. Catherine cried out and grabbed Rebecca's sleeve. "Easy," Rebecca murmured, drawing the little girl closer. "We're all right." But the sky was turning mean. The clouds seemed to drop lower until the treetops vanished into them. Snow thickened. The horse snorted, pushing forward, but its steps grew careful. Elias guided it with quiet clicks of his tongue, never jerking the reins, never cursing at the animal. Rebecca noticed that too, against her will. A cruel man showed himself in small ways. So did a careful one. Elias lifted one hand. "We won't make the ridge cabin before full dark." Rebecca's stomach tightened. "Then where do we go?" "There's a line shack below the creek bend. Old, but it should hold for one night." "Should?" His shoulders stiffened slightly. "Better than freezing in the wagon." The children heard enough to fall silent. The trail dipped, and the world grew darker beneath the trees. Snow whispered against the canvas cover. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked under weight and fell with a soft thud. Rebecca wrapped the blanket tighter around Ben and tried to keep her breathing steady. She had survived city alleys, hunger, debt men, and the shame of standing on an auction platform. But this wild land was different. It did not insult or pity. It simply tested whether a soul was strong enough to remain. The wagon jolted again, harder this time. One wheel slid sideways. Mary gasped. Elias pulled the reins and braced his boots. "Hold on." The wagon tilted toward the ditch. Rebecca grabbed Annie with one arm and the wooden side with the other. Jonah lunged for the twins. The horse fought for footing, hooves scraping ice beneath the snow. For one terrible second, Rebecca saw all of them overturned in the dark, pinned under boards, lost before they had even reached the roof Elias promised. Then Elias moved. He jumped down from the bench while still holding the reins, boots hitting the ground hard. His voice cut through the storm, low but commanding. "Back, Gideon, easy, back now." The horse tossed its head, frightened but listening. Elias stepped close to the animal's shoulder, one hand steady on the harness, his other holding the reins firm. Snow blew around him. His coat snapped in the wind. He looked carved from the storm itself. "Jonah," he called, "stay in the wagon but shift your weight left. Mary, move the little ones toward your mother." Jonah obeyed at once. Mary did too. Rebecca pressed the younger children against the safer side. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely hear the wind. Elias spoke to the horse again, calm and sure. Inch by inch the animal stepped back. The wheel groaned, slipped, caught against a buried root, then rolled onto firmer ground. The wagon settled. No one breathed for a moment. Then Ben began to sob. Rebecca gathered him up, whispering into his hair, "It's done, my darling, we're safe." Elias stood by the horse, his hand still on the harness. Snow clung to his beard and hat brim. Only when the wagon held steady did he climb back onto the bench. He did not look back for thanks. That made Rebecca want to give it more. "You knew what to do," she said. "I've tipped wagons before." "That was not what I meant." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "A frightened horse needs a steady voice. So do children." Rebecca looked down at Ben, still trembling against her. The words settled into her carefully, like a coal placed near cold hands. They found the lined shack after nightfall. It crouched between two pines near a frozen creek, half hidden beneath snow. The roof sagged on one side and the door hung crooked, but smoke-black stones marked a hearth inside. Elias brought the wagon close, then jumped down and opened the door with his shoulder. Cold, stale air spilled out. "Stay here until I check it." He disappeared inside with a lantern. Rebecca waited, holding her children still. The lantern glow moved across gaps in the walls. A minute later, Elias came back. "No animals, no men. Hearth sound enough, come in quick." He lifted the youngest children down first. Ben clung to his neck for one startled moment before realizing what he had done. Elias did not laugh. He only set him gently inside the doorway. Rebecca climbed down last. Her boots sank into the snow and pain shot through her tired legs. Before she could steady herself, Elias offered his hand. She hesitated. Not because she did not need help. Because accepting help was a kind of trust. The wind pushed at her back. Her children waited in the doorway, wide-eyed and shivering. Rebecca took his hand. His palm was rough, warm even through the glove and steady as a fence post. He helped her down without pulling too hard, without making her feel clumsy, without saying a word about her weight or the way her breath caught. Inside the shack, Elias worked fast. He built a fire from split wood stacked under a tarp outside. Mary helped sweep old leaves from the corners. Jonah carried in a small sack of cornmeal, proud to be useful. The twins found a cracked bucket and brought snow to melt. Ruth and Annie huddled near the hearth with Ben between them, watching flames come alive. Soon the shack glowed gold. It was still poor shelter. Wind slipped through the logs, the floor was dirt. The smoke did not draw cleanly at first and made everyone cough. Yet as the fire strengthened, the children's faces changed. Fear loosened. Color returned. Someone laughed when Elias' stubborn milk cow was mentioned again, though none of them had met her. Rebecca knelt near the hearth and mixed cornmeal with water in a dented pan. Her hands remembered the work even while her mind wandered. She felt Elias watching, not in a way that made her skin crawl, but as if he were learning the shape of the family he had taken in. "You said your place was lonely," she said quietly. Elias checked the door latch. Did I? You said winters were long and mean. A man does not notice loneliness unless he has lived with it. His hand paused on the latch. The fire cracked. The children were busy enough not to listen, though Mary glanced up for a heartbeat. Elias turned back toward Rebecca. In the lantern light, his face looked older than it had in town, more tired, less like a legend and more like a man who had carried something heavy too long. My wife died 10 years ago, he said. Rebecca stilled. I'm sorry. He gave a small nod that accepted the words but did not invite comfort. Baby too. Fever took them both before the first snow. After that, the house got quiet. Rebecca's throat tightened. The way he said quiet made it sound worse than grief. It sounded like punishment. Is that why you came to the auction? She asked. His eyes lowered to the fire. No. She waited. Elias rubbed one hand over his jaw. I came because Miss Vale sent word that children might be split if no one bid. I told myself I only wanted to see if the law had grown that heartless. And had it? His gaze lifted to hers. Yes. The shack seemed to grow still around them. Rebecca looked at him then, really looked. This was not a man who had bought her because he wanted control, at least not only because he needed help. There was pain under his hardness, old pain, the kind that made a man either cruel or careful. She did not know yet which one he would become with time. But she knew he had told the truth. Later, after the children ate and the fire burned low, Rebecca settled them close together beneath blankets. Mary stayed awake the longest, watching Elias as he sat near the door with his rifle across his knees. Are we safe? Mary whispered to her mother. Rebecca looked at Elias. His head was bowed, but his eyes were open, fixed on the dark window. For tonight, Rebecca whispered. Mary curled beside the little ones. Rebecca remained sitting near the hearth, too tired to sleep, too full of fear and strange gratitude to close her eyes. Outside, the storm pressed against the shack. Inside, her children breathed in a warm little cluster. Elias spoke without looking over. Mrs. Boone. The name startled her. Yes. If anything happens tonight, you take the children behind the wood stack. There's a loose board in the back wall. It opens into the trees. Rebecca's blood chilled. Why would we need that? His jaw tightened. Because storms make honest travelers seek shelter. He looked toward the dark window. And dishonest men know it too. At that moment, somewhere beyond the shack, a horse whinnied. Not Elias' horse. Another one. Then came the faint crunch of boots in snow. Rebecca reached for Ben before she even knew she had moved. Elias rose slowly, rifle in hand, as a shadow passed across the frosted window. The shadow stopped at the frosted window. Rebecca's hand closed around Ben's small shoulder, and every breath in the shack seemed to disappear at once. The fire had burned low, leaving the room in a red, trembling glow. Mary opened her eyes. Jonah sat up slowly. The twins froze beneath the blanket, their faces pale in the dark. Elias Boone raised one finger to his lips. No one moved. Outside, the wind dragged snow against the walls. A horse snorted. Then came another sound. A soft scrape at the door. Rebecca's heart slammed so hard she thought it might give them away. Elias stepped away from the hearth, rifle held low but ready. He did not rush. He did not shake. Every movement was quiet, controlled, and careful. The man who had looked rough and strange in town now seemed made for this kind of danger, born from mountain dark and winter silence. A voice came from outside. Boone. Rebecca saw Elias' jaw tighten. The voice was male, thin and sharp, with a smile hidden inside it. I know you're in there. Jonah started to rise, but Rebecca caught his sleeve and pulled him back down. Elias moved beside the door. "State your name." A laugh answered, "You forgot me already, that hurts." Elias' eyes cut toward Rebecca for one quick second. There was warning in them. Then he called out, "Silas Crow." Mary leaned close to her mother and whispered, "Who is that?" Rebecca did not answer because she did not know, and the fear of not knowing was worse than any story town had told. Outside, the man chuckled. "Now that's better, open up, I'm freezing near to death." Elias did not reach for the latch. "Ride on. Can't storm's ugly. You've slept in worse." "True enough." A pause. Snow shifted under boots. "But I heard you came down from Mercy Crossing with something interesting." Rebecca's skin went cold. Elias' face did not change, but his grip tightened on the rifle. "What I bring home is no concern of yours. Everything up this pass is my concern when it crosses my road." "Not your road." "That's where we disagree." The children looked from Elias to their mother, fear growing in each small face. Rebecca lifted one hand and motioned them closer to the wood stack, remembering Elias' warning, the loose board in the back wall, the hidden way out. Mary understood first. She gathered Ruth and Annie. Jonah took Ben, though his arms trembled. Peter and Samuel crawled close together without making a sound. Rebecca's pride and terror tangled in her chest. Her children knew too well how to be quiet when danger stood near a door. Elias spoke again. "You alone?" Silas Crow laughed softly. "Would I lie to you?" "Yes." Another pause. Then a second horse moved outside. Rebecca closed her eyes for one heartbeat. "Not alone." Elias shifted his stance, putting himself between the door and the family. Crow's voice sharpened. "Open the door, Boone, I only want to look." "No." "At the widow." Rebecca's blood seemed to stop. "The one with 7 young ones," Crow continued. "Whole town was buzzing. $300. That is a mighty fine price for a woman nobody wanted." Mary's face tightened with hurt. Jonah's eyes filled with anger. Rebecca's shame returned hot and fast, but this time something else rose with it. Not tears, not helplessness. A fierce, quiet flame. She had stood before a town and survived their judgment. She would not let a stranger outside a snowbound shack make her children feel worthless. Elias' voice dropped lower. "You speak of my wife with respect." The words hit Rebecca harder than the wind. "My wife. Not the woman I bought. Not the widow. Not the burden. My wife." The children heard it too. Mary looked at her mother. Rebecca could not look back. Her throat had grown tight. Outside, Crow's laugh faded. "That was fast. Didn't know you were the tender sort." "I said ride on." "And if I do?" Elias lifted the rifle until the barrel aimed at the center of the door. "Then you'll wish you had." Silence followed. For a moment, Rebecca thought Crow might leave. Then the door shook. A heavy boot struck it from outside. Annie cried out before Mary clapped a hand gently over her mouth. The latch groaned. Elias fired once through the top corner of the door, not low enough to hit a man standing outside, but close enough to send wood splinters into the storm. The horses screamed. "Men cursed." "Next one won't be polite," Elias called. Rebecca pulled the children closer to the back wall. Smoke drifted from the rifle barrel. The smell of powder filled the shack, sharp and bitter. Crow shouted from outside, all amusement gone. "You always were too proud, Boone. That pride cost you once. It'll cost you again." Rebecca saw Elias flinch. It was small, so small anyone else might have missed it. But she was a mother. She knew the language of pain hidden under stillness. Crow knew something about him. Something old. Something that could still wound. A second voice muttered outside, lower and rougher. "Leave him be, Silas. Storm's getting worse." Crow spat a curse. "Not yet." Elias glanced toward Rebecca and motioned to the back wall. His meaning was clear. "Be ready." Rebecca nodded. Her hand found the loose board. It shifted under her fingers. Cold air leaked through the gap. Beyond it waited trees, darkness, and a storm that could swallow children whole. But if the men outside broke through, the storm might be kinder. The door shook again. This time not from a kick. From a shoulder. Once. Twice. The latch cracked. Elias moved. He did not wait for the door to give way. He yanked it open himself and stepped into the storm like a man walking into a memory he hated. Rebecca saw only pieces through the doorway, snow rushing sideways, lantern lights swinging in the wind, a tall man with a narrow face stumbling back in surprise, another shadow near the horses. Elias struck Crow hard with the rifle butt, sending him into a drift. The second man reached for something at his belt, but Elias turned the rifle on him before his hand cleared leather. "Don't!" The man froze. Crow rose with a snarl, blood at the corner of his mouth, but he was smiling. "You still hit like a soldier." Elias' voice was flat. "And you still talk like a coward." Crow wiped his mouth with the back of his glove. His eyes flicked past Elias into the shack, landing on Rebecca. "Well, there she is." Rebecca's hand tightened on the loose board. She wanted to hide the children, wanted to vanish them behind her own body, but Crow's stare had already found them. He saw Mary's frightened face, Jonah's angry eyes, Ben curled against the wall. His smile grew. "7 children," he said. "That is a lot of mouths for one lonely ranch. You thinking of raising yourself a work crew, Boone?" Elias stepped into Crow's view, blocking Rebecca again. "They are under my roof now." "Roof?" Crow laughed. "You mean that graveyard of a house up Black Pine Ridge? Does she know what happened there?" Elias went still. The wind seemed to die for one breath. Rebecca looked at him. Crow leaned sideways so his voice carried past Elias. "Did he tell you, Mrs. Boone? Did he tell you about the last woman who lived in that cabin?" Elias moved so quickly Rebecca barely saw it. He grabbed Crow by the coat and shoved him against a pine trunk near the door. "Say one more word." Crow's smile turned cruel. "There he is, that's the Boone folks remember." The second man backed away toward the horses. "Silas, enough." Crow's eyes stayed on Elias. "You can't guard every secret forever." Elias held him there, breathing hard. For a moment, Rebecca feared what he might do. Not because Crow did not deserve to be stopped, but because Elias looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff inside himself. Then little Ben whimpered. The sound floated out into the storm. Elias released Crow. Not gently, not softly, but he let him go. "Ride," Elias said. Crow adjusted his coat, still smiling though fear had touched his eyes. "This ain't finished." "It is for tonight." Crow backed toward his horse. Before mounting, he looked once more at Rebecca. "You keep those children close, ma'am. Black Pine Ridge takes what people love." Then he swung into the saddle. The two riders vanished into the storm, their hoofbeats fading until only wind remained. Elias stood outside for several seconds after they were gone. Snow gathered on his shoulders. His head was lowered and the rifle hung at his side. Rebecca wanted to speak, but the words would not come. At last he stepped back inside and barred the door with a length of wood. The fire had nearly died. The children stared at him as if he had become both protector and mystery in the same breath. Jonah spoke first. "Who was he?" Elias set the rifle down carefully. "A man who brings trouble when he's bored." "That's not all," Mary said quietly. Rebecca looked at her daughter, surprised by the firmness in her voice. Elias did too. Mary swallowed but did not look away. He knew you. He did. And he wanted to scare Mama. Elias' expression changed. A shadow crossed his eyes. Yes. Why? The question hung in the shack. Elias looked at Rebecca then. The silence between them felt heavy with everything Crow had almost said. Rebecca did not ask him about the last woman in the cabin. Not yet. Her children were listening, and his grief stood too raw in the room. Instead she said, "The fire needs wood." For a second Elias only stared. Then he nodded once, as if she had offered him a mercy he did not know how to accept. Jonah rose quickly. "I'll help." Elias studied him, then handed him 2 small sticks from the stack. "Only these, fire first, questions later." The boy obeyed. Soon flames climbed again, filling the shack with warmth. The children slowly returned to their blankets, though none slept easily. Mary stayed pressed against Rebecca's side. Jonah sat awake with his new wool cap pulled low. Ben held Rebecca's skirt in one fist even after his eyes closed. Elias returned to his place by the door, but something had changed. He no longer looked like a stranger who had bought them. He looked like a man guarding a wound. Rebecca watched the firelight move across his face. She thought of Crow's words, "The last woman, the graveyard of a house. Black Pine Ridge takes what people love." A lesser woman might have let fear make her cruel. She might have demanded answers until pain spilled across the floor. But Rebecca had lived with grief long enough to know some truths had to be approached like frightened horses, slowly, with steady hands. Still, the secret had entered the room. And it would not leave. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because sometimes the person who looks most dangerous is the one carrying the deepest sorrow. Near dawn, the storm finally weakened. Gray light seeped through the cracks. The children woke stiff and tired. Rebecca cooked a thin mush from cornmeal while Elias went outside to check the trail. When he returned, his face was grim. "They circled back once," he said. Rebecca's spoon paused. "Crow." "Most likely." "Why?" Elias looked toward the children, then back at her. "Because I paid more than he thought you were worth." Rebecca felt the insult beneath the words, but Elias' face held no judgment. "Or because he thinks you took something from him," she said. Elias did not answer. That was answer enough. They packed quickly. The storm had left the world buried in white. Pine branches glittered in the morning light, beautiful in a way that almost felt cruel after the fear of the night. Elias hitched the horse while Jonah held the lead rope with solemn pride. Mary helped Rebecca fold blankets. The little ones stamped their feet to keep warm. Before climbing into the wagon, Rebecca turned back to the shack. It had been ugly, cold, and frightening. But it had held them through the night. Elias saw her looking. "Ready?" Rebecca faced him. "No." His brow tightened. She lifted Ben into the wagon and tucked the blanket around him. "But we're going anyway." For the first time, Elias Boone almost smiled. The wagon rolled out beneath the pale morning sun. For a while, nothing followed them but their own tracks. The pass widened, and beyond it rose Black Pine Ridge, dark against the snow. Rebecca looked at the mountain and wondered what waited at the top. A home. A graveyard. A secret. And maybe, if courage held long enough, a truth that could either break them apart or bind them closer than any contract ever could. Black Pine Ridge did not welcome them gently. The trail rose in hard bends through the pines, the wagon wheels biting into snow and frozen mud. Sunlight touched the high branches, but little warmth reached the ground. The trees stood close together, tall and dark, their needles holding white snow like old secrets. Every now and then, wind shook the boughs and sent powder falling across the wagon cover. Rebecca sat with the children beneath the blankets and watched the road ahead. No town smoke. No church steeple. No neighbor's fence. Only mountain, stone, and trees. Elias Boone drove with both hands on the reins, his shoulders squared against the cold. Since leaving the line shack, he had spoken only when needed, once to warn of a steep turn, once to ask if Ben's feet were warm, once to tell Jonah that if he kept leaning out, he would tumble headfirst into a drift and shame the whole wagon. That had made Peter and Samuel laugh. Even Elias' mouth had twitched, though he quickly hid it. Rebecca held that tiny almost smile in her heart longer than she should have. She told herself not to be foolish. A man could be brave in danger and still hard in a house. A man could protect children from a stranger and still resent feeding them. A man could carry grief and still turn it into bitterness. But each mile made her less sure of the fear she had carried from town. Mary sat beside her, silent as usual, watching everything. The girl's eyes had changed since the auction. They were still frightened, but now they were sharper too. She had heard Sela's crow's words at the shack. She had heard about the last woman who lived at Black Pine Ridge. Rebecca knew Mary was old enough to understand that roofs could hold secrets. "Do you think his house is cursed?" Ruth whispered suddenly. Annie gasped. "Ruth." "What? That man said it takes people." Rebecca placed a hand over Ruth's cold fingers. "People say many things when they want to scare others." "But what if it is true?" Rebecca looked toward Elias. His back remained still, but she knew he had heard. The air around him had gone tight. "Then we will bring enough life into it that sorrow has no room left," Rebecca said. Mary looked at her mother then. So did Elias. He did not turn fully, only enough that Rebecca saw the side of his face beneath the hat brim. Something moved across it. Pain, perhaps, or gratitude. It was gone too quickly to name. The trail climbed again. The horse strained, breath steaming, but kept pulling. Elias finally stopped near a bend where a narrow creek crossed the road under a skin of ice. "We rest here," he said. "Horse needs water, children need to move." The younger ones nearly cheered. Elias climbed down and helped them from the wagon one by one. Ben held out his arms without thinking, and Elias lifted him easily. The little boy looked embarrassed afterward, as if he had been caught trusting too soon. Elias only set him on his feet and pointed toward a flat patch of snow. "Stamp there, not near the creek." Ben obeyed. The twins began making tracks in the snow. Ruth and Annie followed Mary, who brushed snow from a fallen log so they could sit. Jonah went straight to the horse. "Can I help water him?" Elias studied the boy. "You listen." "Yes, sir." "You follow orders." "Yes, sir." "You stop saying yes before you hear the order." Jonah blinked. Peter snorted with laughter. Rebecca looked down to hide her smile. Elias handed Jonah the lead rope. "Hold steady. Don't wrap it around your hand. If he pulls, you let go before he takes your fingers with him." Jonah nodded, this time slower. "Yes, sir." Rebecca moved carefully from the wagon, her legs stiff from the cold ride. Before she could step down fully, Elias was there with one hand raised. He did not touch her first. He waited. That small patience entered her deeper than it should have. She took his hand. He helped her down, strong and steady, then released her at once. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. A simple exchange, nothing more. Still, Mary watched it with quiet eyes. The rest stop did the children good. Color returned to their cheeks. Peter and Samuel argued over whose boot print was larger. Ruth found a pinecone shaped like a little bird and tucked it into her pocket. Annie asked if Black Pine Ridge had flowers in spring. Elias, after a long pause, said there were blue columbines near the lower meadow if deer did not eat them first. "Blue flowers?" Annie asked, hopeful. "Blue as a clear sky." Rebecca heard the softness in his voice when he answered her. It was rough, almost hidden, but it was there. When they climbed back into the wagon, the children seemed less like prisoners being carried into the unknown, and more like travelers nearing a place they might dare to imagine. Then they reached the ridge. The trees opened without warning. Below them lay a valley cupped in the arms of the mountains. Snow covered most of it, but Rebecca saw the shape beneath. Fenced pasture, a barn with a good roof, a smokehouse, a woodpile stacked higher than a man, a well near the yard. Beyond it stood a cabin larger than she expected, built of dark logs with a stone chimney and a small porch facing the east. For one breath, no one spoke. The place was lonely. But it was not poor. It looked like someone had spent years fighting the wilderness and had not lost. Mary leaned forward. Is that it? Elias stopped the wagon at the top of the slope. That's black pine. Rebecca looked at the cabin. The windows were dark. No smoke rose from the chimney. Snow lay thick on the porch steps. It did not look cursed. It looked asleep. Still, Crow's words returned. Does she know what happened there? Elias clicked his tongue, and the wagon rolled down into the valley. As they came closer, small details appeared. A child-sized rocking chair sat upside down near the porch wall, half hidden beneath snow. A broken swing hung from one rope on a cottonwood tree. The fence around the kitchen garden leaned but had been repaired again and again. Rebecca's eyes moved back to the swing. Elias saw. His face hardened like a door closing. The children piled out once the wagon stopped. They all returned quickly. The twins ran toward the barn until Elias barked, "Stop." They froze. "Barn first only with me. There are tools, traps, and a temper in the milk cow." "The cow has a temper?" Samuel asked. "Worse than mine." That made the children laugh, though they looked unsure if they should. Rebecca stood near the wagon, staring at the cabin. Home, he had called it in the first part of their journey. Not in so many words, perhaps, but every plank and fence rail seemed to say this was a life he had built and guarded. Yet the little chair and broken swing told her another life had once been here too. A life that had ended. Elias climbed onto the porch and shoved the door open. Cold air moved from inside the house, carrying the smell of ashes, pine, old wood, and something faintly sweet, like lavender long dried. He stepped in first, then turned. "Come in." Rebecca gathered the children with her and crossed the threshold. The main room was large, plain, and clean beneath its stillness. A stone hearth filled one wall. Shelves held tin plates, jars, folded cloth, and a Bible with a worn leather cover. A long table stood near the center, scarred by years of use. There were hooks for coats, pegs for tools, and a ladder leading to a sleeping loft above. The children went quiet. Not because it was frightening. Because it felt like stepping into someone else's memory. Near the hearth, on a small shelf, sat a framed likeness of a young woman holding a baby. The woman had bright eyes and a gentle mouth. The baby wore a tiny white cap. Rebecca saw it at once. So did Mary. Elias did not look at the picture. "The loft has bunks," he said, voice rougher than before. "Girls on the left, boys on the right for now. Mrs. Boone, you can take the room behind the kitchen." Rebecca turned to him. "And you?" "Barn has a tack room. I've slept there before." The children all looked at him. Rebecca felt a strange ache. "This is your house," she said. "It's yours by contract too. That does not mean you sleep with saddles and feed sacks." His gaze met hers, sharp with warning. Not anger exactly, but discomfort. "You and the children need space. And you need a bed." A long silence followed. The wind pushed against the cabin walls. Somewhere outside, the horse snorted. Elias looked as if he wanted to argue. Then his eyes moved to the children, all watching him, waiting to see what kind of man ruled this place. He exhaled. "There's a cot near the hearth," he said. "I'll use that." Rebecca nodded once. "Good." Mary lowered her eyes, but not before Rebecca saw the smallest flicker of relief. They spent the next hour making the cabin breathe again. Elias started a fire, and warmth slowly entered the room. Rebecca set the children to work without needing to raise her voice. Mary swept. Jonah and the twins carried firewood from the porch stack. Ruth and Annie shook out blankets. Ben sat on a stool holding the pinecone bird like it was his job to guard it. Elias watched the movement with something close to wonder. A house that had been silent for years now filled with footsteps, whispers, coughs, questions, and the clatter of tin cups. Rebecca moved through the room as if her body remembered what her heart feared to believe. She found the flour bin. She checked the salt. She wiped the table with hot water. She tied back her sleeves and made dough from what little strength she had left. By evening, the smell of bread filled Black Pine Cabin. It changed everything. The children sat at the table, cheeks warm from the fire, hands scrubbed clean. Elias stood near the hearth, looking at the bread as if it were something impossible. Rebecca noticed. "When did you last bake?" she asked. He cleared his throat. "I don't bake." "No, I mean when did anyone?" His eyes drifted to the picture on the shelf. Rebecca wished at once she had not asked. 10 years, he said. The children grew still. Rebecca took the bread from the pan and placed it on the table. Her own hands were trembling now, not from fear, but from the weight of what the house had lost. "Then tonight," she said gently, "it begins again." Elias looked at her for a long time. Something softened in his face, but grief stood behind it like a man in shadow. They ate quietly at first. Then slowly, hunger overcame fear. The twins asked for more beans. Annie dipped bread in broth and smiled. Ben fell asleep sitting up, his cheek nearly touching his plate. Jonah tried not to look too pleased when Elias gave him the largest heel of bread. After supper, Rebecca carried dishes to the basin near the kitchen. That was when she saw the door. Small, narrow, nearly hidden behind a hanging quilt. It was not the door to the bedroom. That one stood open. This door had a brass latch polished by old use, but no dust along its edge. Rebecca glanced toward Elias. He was lifting Ben gently from the bench, carrying him toward the loft ladder where Mary waited above. His movements were careful, almost tender. Rebecca should have turned away. Instead, her eyes returned to the door. A house with secrets always had one room that kept them. Later, after the children were settled and the fire had burned down to golden coals, Elias stepped outside to check the barn. Rebecca remained near the kitchen, folding a cloth slowly, listening to his boots fade across the porch. The cabin was quiet. The hidden door seemed to wait. She told herself not to touch it. She was a stranger here, a wife by contract, not by trust, a mother seeking shelter. She had no right to open locked places in a grieving man's home. But the latch was not locked. And beneath the door, from the narrow crack near the floor, she noticed something impossible. A thin line of fresh candle wax. Someone had been inside that room recently. Rebecca's breath caught. From the loft, Mary whispered, "Mama." Rebecca stepped back quickly. "Yes." "Are we going to be all right here?" Rebecca looked at the hidden door, then toward the dark window where Elias' shape moved outside near the barn lantern. "I pray we are," she said. But when Elias returned moments later, snow on his shoulders and silence in his eyes, Rebecca understood something with chilling certainty. Black Pine Ridge had not been waiting empty. It had been holding a secret alive. Rebecca did not sleep much that first night at Black Pine Ridge. The cabin had warmth, food, and a roof strong enough to hold back the mountain wind, yet her mind would not settle. The children slept in the loft above, their soft breathing drifting down through the dark like a fragile song. Elias lay on the cot near the hearth, boots still on, one arm bent beneath his head. The fire had sunk to red coals, painting the room with restless shadows. Rebecca lay in the small room behind the kitchen, wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. Not her lavender. Not her cedar. Another woman's hands had folded it once. That thought should not have bothered her. The dead were not rivals. Grief was not a thing to envy. Yet the cabin was full of the woman who had lived there before her. Her picture watched from the shelf. Her rocking chair sat near the porch. Her dried lavender lingered in the bedding. Her little child's broken swing moved outside when the wind touched it. And behind the hidden door, fresh candle wax proved someone still carried that old sorrow into the present. Rebecca turned onto her side and stared at the dark shape of the room. She had not asked Elias about the door. Not at supper, when the children were tired and full. Not afterward, when he sharpened an axe blade by the fire in silence. Not when Mary quietly helped her lay blankets in the loft. Not even when Elias paused near that hanging quilt before going to the cot, his face unreadable, his hand hovering near the hidden latch for half a second before he walked away. Some doors were not opened with questions. Some opened only when pain could no longer hold them shut. Near dawn, the rooster outside gave a cracked, angry call that made Ben cry out in his sleep. Rebecca rose at once, pulled on her dress and climbed the ladder to the loft. The children were bundled together like puppies, warm at last. Ben had only dreamed. Mary was already awake, sitting with her knees tucked to her chest. "You did not sleep," Rebecca whispered. "Some." Rebecca sat beside her. Morning light, pale and blue, slipped through the loft window. It fell across Mary's tired face, making her look older than 13. "Are you scared of him?" Mary asked. Rebecca knew who she meant. "I am careful," she said. "That is not the same." "No." Mary looked down at her hands. "When he called you his wife last night, outside the shack, I felt better. Then I felt afraid because feeling better is foolish when you do not know a man." Rebecca's heart ached at the truth in that. "You are not foolish. You are learning how to hope again. Hope is frightening when life has punished it." Mary blinked quickly. "Will he send us away if we make mistakes?" Rebecca glanced down through the loft opening. Elias was no longer on the cot. His blanket was folded with soldier-straight corners, and the front door stood slightly open, letting in a thin thread of cold. "I do not think so," Rebecca said, "but we will learn this place carefully." Mary nodded. Then her eyes moved to the hidden door below. Rebecca saw it and said nothing. By sunrise, Black Pine Cabin had awakened like a house startled by its own heartbeat. Peter and Samuel tumbled down the ladder and nearly landed on Jonah. Ruth announced that the rooster sounded like he had swallowed a nail. Annie asked whether blue columbines could grow in snow. Ben carried his pinecone bird everywhere and refused to let anyone call it a pinecone. Rebecca set them to work before fear could return. Work gave children shape when the world felt too large. Mary helped mix batter for skillet cakes. Jonah brought in kindling. The twins swept ash from near the hearth while arguing over who had the better broom. Ruth and Annie folded blankets. Ben guarded the flour sack from imaginary mice. Elias came in from the barn carrying a pail of milk, his coat frosted white at the shoulders. The whole room went still for one breath. Then Ben pointed at the pail. "Did the mean cow give that?" Elias looked at him. The twins waited, barely holding their laughter. "She gave it after a long argument," Elias said. Ben nodded solemnly. "Did you win?" "Barely." The children burst into laughter. Rebecca turned toward the stove. so Elias would not see her smile too clearly. He set the pail near the table. "Her name is Queenie." "Queenie?" Ruth asked. "That is a nice name." "She named herself." "How can a cow name herself?" "By acting like she owns everything." More laughter filled the room. Elias stood there a little stiff, as if the sound was both welcome and painful. Rebecca noticed the way his eyes moved across the children, not annoyed, not regretful, just uncertain, like a man hearing music in a house that had been silent too long and wondering whether he was allowed to enjoy it. After breakfast, Elias walked them through the rules of the place. The barn loft was not for climbing. The south fence had a weak rail. The creek ice could not be trusted. The smokehouse was to be opened only with an adult. The old mine trail beyond the ridge was forbidden. If anyone heard 3 sharp whistles, they were to return to the cabin at once. Jonah listened like a soldier. The twins listened like boys planning which rule might be tested first. Mary listened like a second mother. Rebecca listened like a woman making a map of every danger. Then came the work. Elias gave each child a task suited to their size, not their fear. Jonah helped carry split logs from the stack. Mary sorted clean linens from old ones. Peter and Samuel gathered eggs with Ruth. Annie helped Rebecca wash jars. Ben sat near the kitchen door with a spoon and a bowl of beans, moving them one by one as though conducting serious business. No one was useless. That mattered more than Rebecca expected. By midday, the cabin no longer felt frozen in old grief. The floor shone in places. A pot of beans simmered. Damp mittens hung near the hearth. Children's tracks marked the snow between cabin and barn. Smoke rose from the chimney in a strong, living line. Rebecca stepped onto the porch with an armful of blankets to shake out. She found Elias standing near the broken swing beneath the cottonwood. He had not seen her. His hand rested on the frayed rope. Snow surrounded his boots. His head was bowed. The wind lifted the loose swing board and let it fall back with a soft tap. Rebecca should have gone inside. Instead, she stood still. Elias spoke without turning. "My daughter liked that tree." Rebecca's hands tightened around the blankets. So this was the child in the picture. "I wondered," she said gently. She was almost 2. The words seemed to cost him. Rebecca stepped down from the porch but stopped several feet away, leaving space between them. "What was her name?" Elias was quiet so long she thought he would not answer. "Abigail." Rebecca looked at the broken swing. "That is a beautiful name." She had her mother's eyes. The wind moved across the yard. In the barn, Queenie lowed like she objected to the cold. The ordinary sound made the grief in the yard even sharper. Elias let go of the rope. Fever came early that year, took them both within 3 days. Rebecca closed her eyes for a moment. "I am sorry, Elias." He looked at her then. It was the first time she had used his given name. She had not meant to. It had slipped out because sorrow stripped people down to what was true. His face changed, not much but enough. "Folks said I should have taken them to town sooner," he said. "Could you have?" "Storm blocked the pass." Then folks spoke from warm rooms after the pain had already done its work. His jaw tightened. Silas Crow's words returned to her. "That pride cost you once." Rebecca understood now. Crow had not only mocked Elias, he had pressed his thumb into the deepest wound. "Is that why Crow speaks of this place like a grave?" she asked. Elias looked toward the ridge. Crow was part of the search party that came when the storm cleared. He saw enough to build stories from it. "And he blamed you." "People prefer blame. It makes grief feel orderly." Rebecca knew that too well. After her husband died, men at the factory had said he must not have moved fast enough. The landlord said she should have saved more. Her sister wrote that Rebecca should not have had so many children if she could not provide. Every pain, it seemed, invited someone to explain why the wounded deserved it. No one should turn mourning into gossip, she said. Elias let out a breath that was almost a laugh but held no humor. Out here, gossip travels faster than mercy. Rebecca wanted to say more, but Ruth called from the porch. "Mama," Samuel dropped an egg in his boot. "I did not drop it," Samuel shouted. "It jumped." The moment broke. Rebecca looked at Elias, and to her surprise, his eyes warmed faintly. "Eggs are known for that," he said. Rebecca laughed before she could stop herself. It was small, brief, but it was the first laugh that came easily since Mercy Crossing. Elias heard it. For a second, grief loosened its grip on his face. If you believe a broken home can come alive again with one small kindness, do not forget to stay with this story, because Black Pine Ridge still has truths hidden behind its walls. That afternoon, Rebecca found the first clue. She was cleaning the room behind the kitchen, the one Elias had given her, when she noticed the bottom drawer of the dresser did not close straight. The wood stuck out by less than an inch. She pulled it gently, expecting old cloth or a warped runner. Instead, something pale caught against the back. A folded letter. It had slipped behind the drawer and been trapped there for years, judging by the brittle crease and faded ink. Rebecca stood very still. The right thing would be to put it back. The safe thing would be to carry it to Elias unopened. But then she saw the name on the outside. "To whoever cares for my child if I cannot." Rebecca's breath caught. Her child. Abigail. The cabin seemed to go silent around her. From outside came the faint sound of Jonah laughing as Queenie kicked over an empty pail. Mary called for him to move. Elias' voice followed, calm and firm. Life continued in the yard while Rebecca held a ghost in her trembling hand. She did not open it. Not then. Instead, she carried it to the main room and waited near the hearth until Elias came inside. He stopped the moment he saw her face. "What happened?" Rebecca held out the letter. "I found this behind the dresser." His eyes dropped to it. The color left his face. For a long moment, he did not move. Then he reached for it slowly, as if paper could cut deeper than steel. His thumb brushed the handwriting. Rebecca saw recognition strike him. "My wife's hand," he whispered. The room seemed to tilt around them. Elias took one step back and sat heavily on the bench by the table. The letter trembled between his fingers. Rebecca's voice softened. "You do not have to open it now." But Elias was no longer looking at her. He was staring at the folded paper like a man, hearing footsteps from a life he had buried. Above them, the children grew quiet in the loft. Elias broke the seal with a shaking hand. And when he unfolded the letter, something small slipped from inside and fell onto the table. A tiny brass key. The tiny brass key lay on the table between them like it had been waiting 10 years to breathe. No one spoke. The fire snapped softly in the hearth. Outside, a shovel scraped against packed snow, then stopped. Even the children in the loft seemed to feel that the house had changed in a single heartbeat. Elias Boone stared at the key, as though it belonged to a dream that had followed him into mourning. Rebecca stood near the table with both hands clasped in front of her. She wanted to comfort him. She wanted to step back. She wanted to tell the children to go outside. She wanted to ask what the key opened. Instead, she waited because grief had its own weather, and a person had to learn when to stand still inside it. Elias picked up the key at last. It looked small in his rough hand, too small for a door, too plain for a strongbox. A little ribbon had once been tied through the end, but only a faded thread remained. "I never saw this," he said. His voice sounded far away. Rebecca looked at the open letter. "May I?" He hesitated only a moment before handing it to her. The paper was fragile, the ink faded but clear enough. Rebecca did not read aloud at first. She read with her eyes slowly, carefully, while Elias watched every movement of her face. "My dearest Elias, if you are reading this, then the fever has taken more than my strength. I pray I am wrong. I pray I wake tomorrow and laugh at myself for hiding a letter like some frightened girl in a storybook. But tonight Abigail is burning with fever, and the snow is too high at the door, and you are outside trying to clear the path again, though your hands are bleeding from the shovel." Rebecca paused. Her throat tightened. Elias looked down at his hands, without seeming to know he had done it. She continued, "I know you blame yourself for everything you cannot stop. You carry the world like it was harnessed to your shoulders. But hear me, my love. If we do not survive this winter, it will not be because you failed us. It will be because this land is hard, and sometimes even love cannot hold back sickness, storm, or God's own choosing." Rebecca lowered the letter for a moment. Elias' face had gone still in that dangerous way men wore when they were trying not to break. Mary appeared at the bottom of the loft ladder, one hand resting on the rung. Jonah stood behind her. The little one stayed above, silent and wide-eyed. Rebecca glanced at Elias, asking without words if she should stop. He shook his head once. So she read on, her voice soft enough to honor the dead and steady enough to serve the living. "There is one thing I have hidden, and I pray you forgive me for it. Before Abigail was born, my father sent a deed packet through Mr. Silas Crow, claiming he had set aside a small valley parcel south of the creek in Abigail's name. He never approved of our marriage, but he loved the thought of a granddaughter. I did not tell you because I feared it would wound your pride, and I wanted this home to feel built by us, not bought by his guilt." Elias' head lifted. Rebecca felt the air sharpen. Silas Crow. The name had entered the room like a snake. "The key is to the small iron box beneath the loose floorboard in the pantry wall. Inside is the deed, my father's letter, and the papers Crow delivered. If I live, I will tell you everything myself. If I do not, protect Abigail's claim. And if our daughter is already gone when you read this, then use that land for life. Not grief, not punishment, life." Rebecca's voice trembled on the final word. Elias did not move. Mary stepped fully into the room now. Jonah followed. Neither child spoke. Rebecca read the last lines. "Do not let this house become a tomb, Elias. Fill it with bread, muddy boots, laughter, quarrels, songs, children, and ordinary noise. Love should not end just because we do. If another wounded soul ever comes to your door, do not turn away because of me. I was loved well. That is enough." Rebecca stopped. She could not read the signature aloud. She folded the letter gently and placed it on the table beside the key. Elias sat like stone. For 10 years, people had told him one story about his loss, that he had failed, that his pride had trapped his wife and child in the mountains, that Black Pine Ridge was cursed because he had loved poorly or acted too late. But here, in a dead woman's careful hand, was the truth. He had been loved. He had been forgiven before he ever knew he needed it. And Silas Crow had known about the deed. Rebecca saw the second truth settle over him with the first. His grief was no longer alone. Suspicion now stood beside it. "Crow brought those papers?" Jonah asked quietly. Elias looked at the boy, as if surprised to remember anyone else was there. "So she wrote." "Then he knew about the land," Mary said. Rebecca turned to her daughter. Mary's face had gone pale, but her eyes were sharp. Elias slowly set the key down. "He knew." "And he never told you?" Rebecca asked. "No." "Could he have taken the papers?" Elias pushed back from the table and stood. The bench scraped the floor. "We're going to find out." He walked toward the pantry with such purpose that Rebecca followed before thinking. The pantry was narrow and cold, built along the back wall near the kitchen. Sacks of flour and beans lined one side. Shelves held jars of peaches, dried herbs, vinegar, salt, and tin boxes. Elias took a lantern from a hook and raised it. Rebecca saw the wallboard at once. Near the floor, behind a barrel of potatoes, one plank sat a little uneven. Elias moved the barrel aside. His hands were careful now, controlled, but Rebecca saw the tremor beneath his strength. He pressed at the edge of the plank, then used his knife to pry it loose. Behind it sat an iron box. Small, black, covered in dust. For a moment, Elias could only stare. Rebecca touched his arm gently. Breathe. The words seemed to reach him. He took the box and carried it to the table. The children gathered close, though Rebecca kept the younger ones near the hearth. Ben clutched his pinecone bird to his chest. Ruth held Annie's hand. The twins forgot to whisper. Elias fitted the tiny brass key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. The lid opened. Inside lay a stack of folded papers tied with blue ribbon. Elias lifted them out. The first was a letter in a different hand, firm and elegant. His late wife's father from the look of it. The second was a deed. The third was a survey map. Rebecca leaned closer. A parcel south of Black Pine Creek. 80 acres. Water rights included. The land touched Elias' western boundary. Mary noticed it too. That means your ranch was bigger than you knew. Elias' eyes moved over the deed. Bigger, he said quietly, and safer. That valley has the lower creek, better grazing, better winter shelter. Rebecca looked toward the window, where snowy pasture stretched beneath the ridge. Why would Crow hide that from you? Elias' mouth hardened, because he wanted it. Jonah's face flushed. Can he take it? Not if these papers are legal. But if nobody knew. Elias folded the deed carefully. Then he could pressure the county, file an abandoned claim, say no heir lived to hold it. Rebecca felt cold move through her despite the fire. Abigail died, she said softly. Yes. And you never knew the land existed. No. Mary's voice was quiet but steady. Then why come now? Why scare us last night? Elias looked at the door. Because I went to town after 10 years and came home with witnesses. Rebecca understood before he said more. A wife, she whispered, children, a living household. Elias turned to her. If this place looks alive again, it gets harder for him to call it abandoned, harder to take pieces of it by rumor and paper. Silence fell, the kind that carried more danger than shouting. Rebecca looked down at the deed, at the little key, at the letter that had traveled across 10 years to reach them. She had thought she was the one Elias saved. Now she saw that something about her arrival had also disturbed a secret someone else wanted buried. Silas Crow had not come to the shack merely to frighten a widow. He had come because Black Pine Ridge was waking up. And that waking threatened him. Elias gathered the papers. I need to ride to Mercy Crossing and file these properly. Rebecca's chest tightened. Today. Before Crow hears we found them. You think he knows where they were hidden? He knew enough to come. Mary stepped forward. You cannot go alone. Elias looked at her. It was not the look adults often gave children when they had spoken out of turn. He listened. I have to go fast, he said. Then take Jonah, she said. No, take Mama. Rebecca blinked. Mary. Mary's eyes shone, but her voice did not shake. People in that town saw her sold like she was nothing. Let them see her walk in with proof she belongs here. Let them see she is your wife. Elias stared at the girl. Rebecca's throat tightened. Mary was still a child, yet hunger and fear had carved wisdom into her too early. Elias looked from Mary to Rebecca. "I won't put you in danger." Rebecca almost laughed, but the sound would have held too much pain. "Mr. Boone, I stood on a platform yesterday while men decided whether my children should be split apart. Danger already knows my name." His eyes lowered for a moment. Then he said, "Elias." Rebecca went still. He looked at her. "If you are walking beside me into town, call me Elias." The children watched them with open faces. Rebecca felt warmth rise beneath her fear. "All right," she said softly, "Elias." A quiet settled between them. Not romance yet, not trust complete, something smaller and maybe stronger. A first plank laid across a deep river. By noon the plan was set. Elias would ride with Rebecca to Mercy Crossing at first light the next morning. Mary and Jonah would remain in charge with strict rules. The twins would help with firewood only from the porch stack. No one would go near the barn alone. The pantry box would stay hidden again, but the deed and letters would travel with Elias. Rebecca spent the afternoon preparing for his absence, though he had not left yet. It soothed her hands. She baked extra bread, counted beans, warmed water for washing, and taught Mary where she wanted things kept. The cabin smelled of flour, smoke, and living again. Elias worked outside, repairing the weak south fence before dusk. Jonah helped him, proud and serious. Through the window, Rebecca saw Elias show the boy how to set a nail without bending it. When Jonah struck his thumb and tried not to cry, Elias did not mock him. He took the hammer, placed Jonah's hand in a pail of snow, and said, "Pain teaches better when pride keeps quiet." Jonah nodded as if he had been handed scripture. Rebecca turned away with a small smile. Later, after supper, the children sat near the hearth while Mary read from the old Bible in a careful voice. The twins had fallen asleep against each other. Ben's pinecone bird rested on his chest. Ruth and Annie leaned against Rebecca's knees. Elias stood by the hidden door behind the quilt. Rebecca saw him there. This time he opened it. Inside was not a room of danger. It was a small nursery. A cradle stood near the wall, covered with a white cloth. A child's blanket lay folded on a chair. A wooden horse sat on the floor, one wheel broken. Dust covered everything except the path from the door to the cradle. Elias stepped inside and stood very still. Rebecca remained at the threshold. He lifted the white cloth from the cradle. His shoulders shook once. Only once. But Rebecca saw. She stepped in quietly and stood beside him, not touching him, not speaking. Together they looked down at the empty cradle. After a long time, Elias said, "I thought keeping this room shut meant I was honoring them." Rebecca's voice was gentle. "Maybe your wife's letter was her way of opening it again." He closed his eyes. From the main room, Ben laughed in his sleep. The sound floated into the nursery like a small bell. Elias opened his eyes and looked toward it. Rebecca did too. And in that moment, both of them understood the same thing. Black Pine Ridge was no longer only a place of loss. It was becoming a place someone might try to steal. Before dawn, while the cabin still slept, a rider stopped on the far ridge and watched the smoke rising from Elias Boone's chimney. Silas Crow sat silent in the saddle, his coat collar lifted against the cold. Beside him, a younger man shifted uneasily. "You sure the papers are still there?" Crow's face hardened. "If they find them," he said, "Boone rides to town." "And if he does?" Crow looked down at the cabin, at the lamplight glowing warm in the windows, at the signs of children in the snow. "Then we make sure he never reaches it." Dawn came pale and cold over Black Pine Ridge. Rebecca was already awake when the first thin light touched the cabin window. She had slept in small broken pieces, waking at every pop from the hearth, every sigh from the loft, every creak of the walls. The deed papers were tucked inside Elia's leather satchel, wrapped in oilcloth and tied close. She had checked them twice before lying down, then once more after midnight, as if paper could vanish by wanting. The cabin felt different this morning. Not safe exactly. Alive. Mary was curled near Annie in the loft. Jonah slept with one arm hanging over the side of his bunk, his new wool cap still on his head. Peter and Samuel had kicked off half their blanket. Ruth mumbled something about blue flowers in her sleep. Ben clutched his pinecone bird under his chin. Rebecca stood beneath them for a moment, memorizing the sight. 7 children. Still together. Still under one roof. That was more than she had been promised by the world. Behind her, Elias moved quietly near the table, loading a small sack with bread, dried apples, and a tin of coffee. He had shaved, though the lines on his face looked deeper in morning light. His dark coat was buttoned high, his hat resting on the table beside the satchel. "You should eat before we go," Rebecca said softly. "So should you." "I will when the children wake. If we wait that long, Crow may already be on the road." The name pulled cold through the room. Rebecca looked toward the window. Snow lay blue and untouched across the yard, except for the trails the children had made the day before. Smoke rose straight from the chimney. The barn was still. Nothing moved near the ridge. Still, she felt watched. Elias noticed. "What is it?" "I do not know." He crossed to the window and stood partly behind the curtain, scanning the tree line. Rebecca waited. At last he said, "No fresh tracks near the yard." "That you can see." His eyes shifted to her. "You have good instincts." "I have 7 children. Fear teaches a woman to read quiet places." He did not argue. Mary climbed down a few minutes later, careful not to wake the others. Her hair hung loose over one shoulder, and sleep had left a crease on her cheek, making her look younger for the first time in days. Then she saw Elias' satchel and straightened. "You are leaving now." "At first light," Elias said. Mary looked at Rebecca. "Both of you." "Yes." The girl pressed her lips together. She wanted to be brave. Rebecca saw it, and for one sharp second she nearly changed her mind. Leaving the children behind in a house that still held secrets felt like tearing her own heart in half. But Mary stepped forward before Rebecca could speak. "I'll keep the fire low, not high. Jonah will bring wood only from the porch. The twins won't go to the barn. Ruth and Annie stay inside unless I say otherwise. Ben stays with me. If we hear 3 sharp whistles, we come to the cabin. If we hear horses, we hide in the pantry corner and stay quiet." Elias looked at her with solemn respect. "You remembered every word." "I had to." Rebecca reached for her daughter and pulled her close. Mary did not cry, but her fingers tightened in the back of Rebecca's dress. "I do not like this," Mary whispered. "Neither do I." "Then why go?" Rebecca held her face between both hands. "Because some papers decide whether a family gets to keep a home, and I am tired of letting other people hold papers over our heads." Mary swallowed. Elias stepped away from the table and lowered his voice. "If anything feels wrong, you bar the door and keep everyone away from windows. There's flour, beans, water, and wood enough for 2 days. I do not expect trouble here while I am gone." "But you expect it somewhere," Mary said. Elias' silence answered. Mary nodded once, trying to look older again. Jonah came down next, then the rest, woken by the mood more than noise. Breakfast was quiet. Rebecca gave extra bread to the children and pretended she was not watching each face like it might be her last sight of them. Elias pretended not to notice. His kindness was sometimes like that, hidden under silence so a person could keep dignity. When it was time, Ben cried. Not loud. Just a small broken sound, as he held Rebecca's skirt. "Don't go, Mama." Rebecca knelt and gathered him close. "I will come back." "Promise." She closed her eyes. Promises were dangerous on the frontier. Snow, men, sickness, and law had a way of making liars out of honest people. Still, a child needed something to hold. "I promise I will fight my hardest to come back," she said. Ben frowned. "That is not the same." "No," she whispered, kissing his forehead, "but it is true." Elias turned away then, as if that answer had struck him somewhere deep. They left Black Pine Ridge with the sun barely above the trees. Elias rode his black horse. Gideon and Rebecca sat behind him, one hand gripping the saddle strap, the other holding the satchel against her side beneath her cloak. He had wanted her to ride the mare from the barn, but she admitted she had not ridden enough to manage mountain ice. So now she sat close behind him, careful to keep space where she could, aware of every shift of his shoulders beneath the heavy coat. The trail down from Black Pine was quiet. Too quiet. Birds did not call, the trees stood still, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Elias kept the horse at a steady pace, not rushed, not slow. His head turned often, reading tracks, snow, branches, slopes. Rebecca understood little of what he saw, but she watched anyway. After an hour, she began to notice small things. A broken crust of snow near a bend. Pine needles scattered across a place where no branch had fallen. A faint dark patch near the creek crossing. Elias stopped before the creek. "What is it?" Rebecca whispered. He dismounted in one smooth motion and crouched near the bank. Rebecca stayed mounted, heart quickening. He brushed snow away with gloved fingers. "Two horses crossed here before dawn." "Crow." Could be anyone." He looked up at her. The truth sat in his eyes. On the far side of the creek, the trail passed between two high banks thick with pine. It was narrow enough that a wagon would struggle through, and a rider would have little room to turn. Rebecca stared at it. "That looks like a place a man might wait." Elias stood. "Yes." "Then we should turn back. And give Crow time to file against the land first." She tightened her hold on the satchel. "No." Elias watched her a moment. "You are afraid." "Yes. But you still want to go." "I have been afraid since my husband died. Fear is not a reason to hand my children's future to a thief." His face softened just a little. Then he reached up to help her down. "We walk from here." They led Gideon off the trail and into the trees. Snow reached Rebecca's ankles, then her calves. Her skirt caught on brush. Cold wetness seeped into her boots. Elias moved ahead, breaking a path, one hand holding the horse's reins, the other near his rifle. They climbed above the trail along a ridge of stone and pine roots. The way was hard, but it gave them a view of the narrow pass below. Halfway across, Elias froze. Rebecca nearly bumped into him. He pointed through the trees. There below them, two men waited near the trail. One sat on a horse. One stood beside a fallen log, smoking. Sela's Crow was not with them, but Rebecca recognized the unease in the younger man's posture from the night at the shack. He shifted often, rubbing his hands together and glancing back toward the road to Mercy Crossing. The other man was older, thick-necked, with a shotgun resting across his arm. Rebecca's mouth went dry. Elias leaned close enough that his breath warmed her ear. "Those are Crow's men." "What do we do?" "Go around." "Can we?" "Slowly." They turned higher into the trees. Rebecca followed as quietly as she could, though every snapped twig sounded like a gunshot to her nerves. Gideon moved with surprising care, guided by Elias' hand. Snow slid from branches. Somewhere below, the younger man laughed at something the other said. Then Rebecca's boot slipped. Her foot went out from under her on hidden ice. She reached for a branch, missed, and fell against a dead limb. It cracked loudly. The sound split the morning. Below, the laughter stopped. Elias caught Rebecca by the arm and pulled her behind a pine. The older man shouted, "Who's there?" Gideon tossed his head. Elias gripped the bridle and whispered to him. The horse stilled. Rebecca pressed one hand over her mouth. Her heart pounded so hard she felt sick. Footsteps moved below. The younger man called, "Probably Deer." The older one answered, "Deer don't wear skirts." Rebecca closed her eyes. Elias looked at her. No blame, no anger, only decision. He pointed to a cluster of rocks ahead, then touched his chest, then pointed down. She understood enough. He would draw them away. She shook her head sharply. No. His expression did not change. He placed the reins in her hand, then touched the satchel beneath her cloak. "Protect this." Before she could stop him, Elias stepped out from behind the pine and fired one shot into the air. The sound cracked across the ridge. The men below shouted. Elias ran left through the trees, boots pounding over snow and stone. The older man fired toward him, the shot splintering bark several feet away. Rebecca flinched but held Gideon's reins tight. The horse jerked once, then steadied, as if he trusted Elias even when Elias was no longer there. "Boone," the younger man shouted, "he's up there." Both men charged after Elias. Rebecca waited until their footsteps faded, then moved. Her legs shook so badly she almost fell again. She led Gideon toward the rocks Elias had pointed to, clutching the satchel beneath her cloak. She did not know where Elias was. She did not know if he was hurt. She did not know whether the men would circle back and find her. But she knew one thing. The papers had to reach town. The ridge path dropped sharply beyond the rocks. Rebecca slid more than walked, one hand gripping Gideon's rein, the other clutching branches. At the bottom, she found herself on the main trail past the ambush point. Mercy Crossing lay somewhere ahead. Elias was behind her. Every part of her wanted to turn back. Then she thought of Mary holding Ben in the cabin, Jonah trying to be brave, Ruth's blue flowers, Annie's soft questions, the twins laughing over eggshells, 7 children who needed more than her fear. They needed her courage. Rebecca climbed back into the saddle with difficulty, awkward and breathless. Gideon shifted beneath her but did not bolt. She had not ridden alone in years. She barely knew how to guide him. Still, she leaned forward and whispered the only truth she had. "Take me where he meant to go." The horse's ears flicked. Then Gideon started down the trail. Behind her, far up the ridge, another shot echoed. Rebecca's whole body went cold. She looked back, but the trees hid everything. "Elias," she whispered. The horse kept moving. Minutes later, the trail opened into a wide, snowy meadow. Rebecca saw the road to Mercy Crossing ahead, marked by wagon ruts and fence posts. Hope rose fast. Too fast. A rider emerged from the far side of the meadow. Silas Crow. He sat his horse calmly, blocking the road, smiling as if he had expected her all along. Rebecca pulled Gideon to a stop. Crow touched the brim of his hat. "Morning, Mrs. Boone." Her fingers tightened around the reins. Crow's eyes dropped to the satchel beneath her cloak. "Well now," he said softly, "looks like your husband gave you something that belongs to me." Rebecca lifted her chin, though fear burned through every inch of her. "It belongs to a dead child," she said, "and to the truth." Crow's smile faded. Far behind her, the last echo of gunfire rolled through the mountains. And Rebecca understood that if Elias did not come, she would have to face this man alone. Silas Crow sat in the snowy meadow like a man who believed the whole mountain had been made for his convenience. His horse shifted beneath him, black tail flicking once against the cold. The morning sun had climbed higher, laying a pale shine over the snow, but there was no warmth in it. Not on the road, not in Crow's smile, not in the space between him and Rebecca Boone. Rebecca kept both hands on the reins, though her fingers had gone stiff. Gideon stood steady beneath her, breathing steam into the air. Elias' horse did not toss or shy. That gave Rebecca a little courage. The animal knew danger and had not yet decided to run. Crow's eyes stayed fixed on the leather satchel tucked under her cloak. "You made good time," he said, "for a woman who does not know these roads." Rebecca forced herself to answer evenly, "Move aside." His smile widened. "That is a bold tone for someone alone." "I am not alone." Crow glanced past her toward the trees. No one came from the ridge. No hoofbeats, no shout, no sign of Elias. Far behind her, the mountain stood silent after the gunfire. Crow looked back at her. "Looks to me like Boone found other business." Rebecca felt the words strike where he meant them to. Her heart pulled toward the trees, toward Elias, toward the man who had walked into danger so she could carry the papers forward. But she could not let Crow see that fear. "You do not know Elias Boone very well," she said. Crow's expression sharpened. "I know him better than you do, Mrs. Boone. I knew him when his pride was fresh. I knew him when his wife begged him to leave this ridge for town, and he chose land over sense." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "That is not what happened." Crow leaned forward in the saddle. "And you know, because of some old letter, dead women write kind things, living men make choices." His voice was soft, but each word tried to poison what she had learned. Rebecca thought of the letter in Elias' wife's own hand, the way she had written of his bleeding hands in the snow, the way she had told him he was loved well, the way she had asked that the house be filled with life again. "No," Rebecca said, "living men tell lies when land is worth money." For the first time, Crow's smile truly faltered. Then it returned, colder than before. "You have spirit, I will grant you that. Boone always did like hopeless causes." He nudged his horse forward. Rebecca pulled Gideon back one step. Crow lifted a hand as if calming a skittish animal. "No need for foolishness. Hand me the satchel, and I will let you ride back to your children." "My children's future is in this satchel." "Your children's future," he laughed once without humor. "Lady, your children's future depends on who can keep them fed. Boone's land is hard. His house is haunted. His name is mud in this county. You think a court clerk will stand against me because a widow with 7 mouths waves old paper at him?" Rebecca's stomach clenched. He was trying to make the world feel too large again, too legal, too male, too fixed against her. She had felt that weight in Mercy Crossing when men discussed her family as if they were crates to be sorted. She had felt it in Ohio when debts had grown faster than bread. She had felt it every time someone with a pen had more power than a mother with empty hands. But this time, her hands were not empty. The deed was real. The letter was real. And truth, once carried into the open, could be harder to bury than a man like Crow believed. Rebecca lifted her chin. "Then I suppose we will find out what the clerk does." Crow's eyes darkened. "You are not getting past me." Gideon stamped once, restless now. Rebecca looked around quickly. Meadow to the left, too open. Trees to the right, thick but deep with snow. Crow blocked the road. She was not skilled enough to outride him, not with a satchel and her own fear pulling at her arms. Crow knew it. He began moving forward slowly. "Do not make me drag you down." Rebecca's breath caught, but anger rose hotter than fear. "You speak as if every person can be taken by force." "Out here most can." "Then you have never met a mother who has already watched the world reach for her children." Crow's mouth hardened. He kicked his horse suddenly. Rebecca acted before thought could stop her. She jerked the reins and pressed her heels the way she had seen Elias do. Gideon sprang sideways, not down the road, but toward the right into the trees. Crow cursed and turned after her. Branches whipped Rebecca's arms and face. Snow broke loose from pine limbs and fell across her shoulders. Gideon plunged through the trees with far more sense than she had, choosing gaps and rising ground. Rebecca clung to the saddle, one hand locked in the reins, the satchel trapped beneath her elbow. Crow followed close. "Stop," he shouted. Rebecca did not stop. A low branch nearly swept her from the saddle. She ducked just in time, heart hammering. Gideon climbed a small rise, then dropped into a hollow where snow lay deep. His hooves punched through crust. Rebecca gasped as the horse stumbled, recovered, and surged forward again. Behind her, Crow's horse snorted and slowed. He was heavier. His horse was not mountain-bred like Gideon. Rebecca leaned forward and whispered, "Good boy, please, good boy." The trees thinned ahead. For one bright second, she saw an opening that might lead back to the main road beyond Crow. Then a shot cracked. Bark exploded from a trunk near her head. Rebecca cried out, and Gideon reared. She lost one stirrup. The world tilted. She grabbed the saddle horn and held on with all her strength as the horse came down hard. Crow's voice thundered behind her. "Next shot takes the horse." Rebecca froze. Gideon trembled beneath her. Her mind raced. If Crow shot the horse, she would fall. If she fell, he would take the satchel. If he took the satchel, the papers might vanish like they had vanished for 10 years. Black Pine Ridge could be stolen by ink and silence. She turned Gideon slowly. Crow sat 20 yards back, pistol raised. His face no longer held charm, only rage. "Get down," he said. Rebecca did not move. "Get down now." Her throat was dry. "You would harm an innocent animal over land that is not yours." "I would do worse over land that should have been mine years ago." And there it was. Not rumor. Not charm. Truth, ugly and plain. Rebecca kept her eyes on him. Abigail Boone's land. Crow sneered. "A dead child cannot own a valley." But she did. And Boone never knew. That was the beauty of it. Rebecca felt cold settle over her skin. She needed him to keep talking. She needed time, for Elias, for a stranger, for any mercy the morning had left. "You stole the papers," she said. "I delayed them." "You hid them." "I protected an opportunity." "You let a grieving man believe he had lost everything." Crow's jaw flexed. He did lose everything, he just left useful pieces behind. The cruelty of it nearly stole Rebecca's breath. Then came a faint sound behind Crow. Not from the ridge. From the road. Wagon wheels. Crow heard it too, his head turned sharply. Rebecca saw a team coming along the lower road toward Mercy Crossing. A freight wagon, slow and heavy, with 2 men on the bench. Too far to help quickly, but close enough to become witnesses. Crow swore under his breath. Rebecca made her choice. She pulled the satchel free from beneath her cloak and held it high. Crow's eyes snapped back to her. "You want the papers," she called. "Hand them over. Come take them." His face twisted. He dug his heels into his horse and charged. Rebecca waited until he was almost close enough to reach her. Then she threw the satchel. Not toward Crow. Toward the freight road. It sailed through the cold air, struck a drift, rolled down the slope, and landed near the edge of the open track below. Crow roared and turned his horse after it. Rebecca kicked Gideon hard. The horse lunged the other direction, bursting from the trees and back into the meadow. Crow hesitated, torn between her and the satchel. Greed chose for him. He raced toward the road. Rebecca leaned low over Gideon's neck. Now she was not carrying papers. Now she was carrying only herself and a prayer. The freight wagon men shouted as Crow came tearing down the slope. One of them stood, waving his arms. Crow jumped from his saddle near the drift and grabbed the satchel. But before he could remount, a voice cracked across the meadow. "Crow!" Rebecca turned so sharply she nearly lost balance. Elias Boone stood at the edge of the trees. His coat was torn at one sleeve. Blood marked his temple, but he was upright, rifle aimed steady. Behind him, Jonah's cap would have been proud of how straight he stood, Rebecca thought wildly, because Elias looked like a man who had come through hell on foot and brought all his will with him. Crow froze with the satchel in his hand. The freight wagon had stopped now. 2 drivers stared from the road. Another rider appeared beyond them, wearing the dark coat of a county deputy. "Witnesses." Crow saw them too. Elias walked forward, each step careful but strong. "Put it down." Crow's lips pulled back. "You should be dead on that ridge. I disappoint men like you often." Rebecca rode closer but kept distance. Relief hit her so hard her hands began to shake. Elias glanced at her once, a quick look that asked if she was hurt. She shook her head. His eyes softened for less than a breath, then returned to Crow. The deputy rode nearer, frowning. "What is this?" Crow straightened quickly, charm trying to return. "A misunderstanding." Rebecca found her voice. "No, sir. That man tried to steal legal deed papers from me. There are letters inside that satchel proving a hidden land claim belonging to the Boone family." The deputy looked at Crow. Crow laughed. "You going to believe a woman Boone bought yesterday?" The words hung in the cold air. Rebecca felt them, but they no longer sank into her. Before she could answer, Elias spoke. "You will not speak of my wife that way." The deputy's eyes moved between them. The freight driver climbed down from his wagon. "I saw him chase her, saw her throw that bag clear, and him run for it like a fox after a hen." His partner nodded, saw the pistol too. Crow's face hardened. The deputy swung down from his horse, set the satchel on the ground, Silas. Crow did not. His eyes darted across the meadow, measuring distance, men, horses, escape. Elias' rifle did not waver. Rebecca held her breath. For one terrible moment, she thought Crow might try to shoot his way free. Instead, he dropped the satchel into the snow. The deputy stepped forward and picked it up. "I think we all need to ride into Mercy Crossing," he said. Crow smiled thinly. "Fine, let the clerk sort it out." Elias walked to Rebecca's side as the deputy secured Crow's pistol. "You are bleeding," she whispered. "So are you." She touched her cheek and found a thin scratch from a branch. "It is nothing." His eyes held hers. "It is not nothing." The words were simple, but they moved through her like warmth entering cold hands. For most of her life, Rebecca's pain had been counted only when it stopped her from working. Elias saw a scratch and called it worth noticing. That nearly broke her more than fear had. He reached for Gideon's bridle. "Can you ride to town?" "Yes." "You sure?" "No," she said honestly, "but I will." A faint smile touched his tired mouth. "That answer suits you." They rode into Mercy Crossing just after noon. This time, Rebecca did not arrive on an auction platform. She arrived beside Elias Boone, with a county deputy behind them, Silas Crow under watch, and 2 freight drivers talking loudly enough for half the street to hear. Faces appeared in windows. Men stepped out of shops. Women paused near the mercantile. The same town that had watched her sold now watched her return with proof in her hands and snow on her hem. The clerk's office smelled of ink, dust, and old paper. Rebecca stood straight while Elias placed the deed, the letter, and the survey map on the counter. The clerk, Mr. Adley, adjusted his spectacles and read slowly. His first expression was annoyance, then surprise, then something close to alarm. "This deed was properly signed," he said. Crow scoffed from near the door. "Old paper." The clerk ignored him. "Witnessed and sealed, parcel south of Black Pine Creek, water rights included." Elias' voice was quiet. Why was it never recorded? The clerk turned to the old ledger behind him, flipped pages, then stopped. His face went pale. Rebecca watched him closely. "What is it?" she asked. Mr. Adley did not answer at first. Then he turned the ledger around. A recording entry had been made 10 years ago. The deed had not vanished. It had been filed, then marked void 6 months later. Reason: no surviving Boone heir. Elias' hand closed slowly into a fist. Rebecca stared at the words. No surviving Boone heir. The clerk swallowed. That should not have been entered unless proof of death and claim release were presented. The deputy looked at Crow, who filed the release. The clerk looked back down at the page. His voice came out thin. "Silas Crow." Crow laughed once. Clerical business, nothing more. But no one laughed with him. Rebecca stepped closer to the ledger, reading the line again. No surviving Boone heir. A dead child's inheritance erased. A grieving husband deceived. A valley nearly stolen by one clean sentence in a county book. Then Mr. Adley turned the page. And his face changed again. "There is another filing," he whispered. Elias leaned forward. "What filing?" The clerk looked at Rebecca now, and something in his face made her chest tighten. 3 days ago," he said, "Mr. Crow filed a petition claiming Black Pine Ridge itself should be reviewed for abandonment and transfer." Elias went still. Rebecca felt the floor fall away beneath her. Crow's smile returned, slow and cruel. The deputy gripped his arm, but Crow only looked at Rebecca. "You see, Mrs. Boone," he said softly, "that little valley was only the beginning." The room seemed to shrink around them. Elias had not only been at risk of losing Abigail's land. He was about to lose Black Pine Ridge. And back on that mountain, 7 children waited in the very home Crow intended to take. The clerk's office went so quiet that Rebecca could hear snow melting from Elias Boone's coat and dripping onto the floor. One drop. Then another. Black Pine Ridge itself. The words stood in the room like a loaded gun. No one had yet touched. Rebecca looked from the county ledger to Silas Crow, then to Elias. For the first time since she had met him, Elias did not look like a mountain. He looked like a man who had been struck in a place too deep for blood to show. The ranch was not just land. It was his wife's grave. His daughter's memory. The cabin he had built with his own hands. The porch where a broken swing still moved in winter wind. And now, the same town that had almost split Rebecca's children by papers and signatures had nearly let another paper steal the only home that had taken them in. Mr. Adley, the clerk, shut the ledger halfway, as if closing it might soften what they had all seen. "It is only a petition," he said quickly. "A review has not been completed." Elias' voice came rough. "When?" The clerk swallowed. "Tomorrow afternoon." Rebecca felt her heart drop. "Tomorrow," she said. The deputy, a square-faced man named Marshal Henry Tate, stepped closer to the desk. "Who ordered it so fast?" Mr. Adley glanced at Crow and then down at the ledger. The petition claimed the property had been unoccupied for years and unsafe for settlement use. It also claimed no lawful household remained there. Rebecca's hands curled at her sides. "No lawful household," she repeated. Crow smiled faintly. You arrived yesterday, ma'am. Takes more than one night and a skillet of bread to make a family legal. Elias turned toward him so sharply that Marshall Tate lifted a hand between them. Elias Boone. But Rebecca stepped forward first. She did not shout. She had learned that shouting often gave cruel men a reason to call a woman hysterical. Instead, she used the voice she used when 7 frightened children needed to believe their mother could still hold the world together. My marriage contract was signed in this town, she said. The custody papers named all 7 of my children under Elias Boone's roof. That was done by your own officer, under your own seal. Mr. Adley blinked, then began shifting through papers on his desk. Yes, but those documents may not have been copied into the property review file yet. Then copy them now. Crow laughed under his breath. Rebecca looked at him, something funny. You think ink saves people out here? No, she said, but I have watched ink hurt people. It is time it did something honest. The freight driver by the door muttered, "Amen to that." Marshall Tate gave him a warning look, but the man only folded his arms. Elias had not spoken. His eyes were fixed on the ledger, on the old entry marking his daughter's claim void. Rebecca wondered what memories were passing through him. Perhaps the fever room, the snowbound door, his wife's letter hidden behind a drawer for a decade. Perhaps all the years he had lived in silence, never knowing another man had turned his grief into opportunity. She stepped close enough that only he could hear her. Elias. His eyes shifted to her. Do not let him pull you into rage. That is where men like him win. His jaw worked once. He stole from my dead child. I know. He came for the rest. I know. He may have men near my house. Rebecca's face changed. There it was. The truth neither of them had wanted to say. Black Pine Ridge was not only at risk by law. The children were there, alone with Mary and Jonah, trusting locked doors and rules to hold back whatever Crow had set in motion. Elias turned to Marshall Tate. I need to get back. Marshall Tate held Crow by the arm. And I need to keep this man here until Judge Mercer can hear the matter. Crow's smile thinned. On what charge? The marshal looked at the freight drivers, threatening a woman on the road, firing a pistol, attempted theft of legal papers. Crow lifted his brows, all misunderstandings. Rebecca stepped to the desk and pointed at the ledger, and filing false claims. Mr. Adley looked nervous. That would require investigation. Then start one. The clerk shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Boone, county procedure. County procedure nearly took my children yesterday, she said, still calm, still steady. County procedure erased a dead child from her own land. County procedure almost handed a grieving man's home to the person who deceived him. So forgive me if I am not moved by procedure unless it finally serves the truth. No one spoke. Even Crow's smile faded for a moment. Elias looked at Rebecca then with something fierce and quiet in his eyes. Not surprise anymore. Not pity, respect. The kind that made her stand taller without meaning to. Marshall Tate cleared his throat. Adley, copy the marriage and custody papers into the property file. Then write a stay on the review until Judge Mercer reads the deed packet. Mr. Adley looked relieved to be given an order. Yes, Marshal. Crow's face hardened. You cannot hold me on gossip. No, Tate said, but I can hold you while I ask why your name appears on a release that should never have been filed. Crow leaned closer, voice low. Careful, Marshal, I have friends in this county. Tate did not blink. Then I hope they bring you supper. For one small breath, Rebecca almost smiled. But Elias was already moving toward the door. I am going home, he said. Marshall Tate turned, not alone. I do not have time to wait. The marshal looked to one of the freight drivers. Sam, take the old gray from the stable and ride to Judge Mercer. Tell him I need him here before dusk. Amos, stay and sign your statement." Then he looked at Rebecca and Elias. "I will ride with you." Crow's head lifted. Rebecca saw it, so did Elias. A flicker of worry. Not because the marshal would ride with them. Because Crow knew there was reason to hurry. Elias grabbed the satchel from the desk. "Then we go now." They left Mercy crossing under a sky, turning the color of pewter. The town watched again. The same women who had whispered near the mercantile now stood with gloved hands clasped at their waists. Men outside the saloon stared without speaking. Mr. Pell, the placeman officer, appeared on the boardwalk, his face pale when he saw Rebecca riding beside Elias instead of standing helpless on a platform. Miss Harriet Vale stepped out of the settlement office. Her eyes met Rebecca's. Rebecca did not look away. For once, she was not being led by other people's decisions. She was riding toward her children, toward a home not yet fully hers, carrying a truth that had already shaken the town's dust from its shelves. The ride back was harder. Elias pushed the pace, and Gideon seemed to understand urgency. Rebecca rode behind him again while Marshal Tate followed on a bay horse borrowed from the livery. The cold cut through Rebecca's cloak. Her cheek stung where the branch had scratched it. Her legs ached from riding, but she kept silent. Fear had become a rope around her chest. Every mile took too long. Every bend might reveal smoke. Every ridge might hide Crow's men. Elias spoke only once. "If they are hurt." "Do not finish that," Rebecca said quickly. His shoulders tightened. She softened her voice. "Do not give the fear words before we know the truth." A long silence passed. Then he nodded. They reached the creek crossing near late afternoon. Snow there had been disturbed by several sets of hoofprints. Elias dismounted at once. Marshal Tate leaned down from his saddle. "How many?" "3 riders," Elias said. "Maybe 4, headed toward Black Pine." Rebecca felt the blood leave her face. "How long ago?" Elias touched the edge of one print. "Hours." "Hours?" Mary had been alone for hours. Jonah had tried to be brave for hours. Ben had waited for a promise that was still trying to come true. Elias swung back into the saddle. "Hold tight." This time, he did not take the safer trail. He took a narrow cut through the pines that climbed hard along the ridge. Branches tore at their clothes. Snow flew under Gideon's hooves. Marshal Tate cursed once behind them but kept up. Rebecca clung to Elias and prayed without words, because words would have taken too long. At last the trees opened above Black Pine Valley. The cabin stood below. Smoke rose from the chimney. Rebecca nearly sobbed with relief. Then she saw the barn door hanging open. Elias saw it too. A horse that was not theirs stood near the woodpile. Another waited by the smokehouse. The front door of the cabin was shut, but something dark had been nailed to it. Elias rode down the slope like thunder. Marshal Tate drew his pistol but kept it low. Rebecca's whole body trembled as they entered the yard. "Mary," she shouted before Elias could stop her. No answer. Only Queenie lowed from the barn, angry and frightened. Elias swung down and lifted Rebecca from the horse almost before it stopped. Then he moved toward the cabin, rifle ready. The dark thing on the door was a piece of torn cloth. Mary's blue hair ribbon. Rebecca's knees nearly failed. Elias ripped it down, his face white with fury. From inside the cabin came a small sound. A scrape. Then Jonah's voice, tight and desperate. "Mr. Boone." Elias lowered the rifle a fraction. "Jonah." The bar lifted from inside. The door opened. Jonah stood there with a fireplace poker in both hands, face streaked with soot, eyes red but fierce. Behind him, Mary held Ben against her side. Ruth and Annie crouched beneath the table. Peter and Samuel stood near the pantry with sacks piled in front of them like a fort. They were alive. Rebecca ran to them. Ben broke first, crying so hard he could barely say Mama. Mary held on to Rebecca with one arm and kept Ben tucked between them. Jonah lowered the poker and looked suddenly like the child he was. Elias stepped inside slowly, scanning every corner. What happened? Mary spoke, because Jonah's jaw was trembling too hard. Men came after noon, 3 of them. They said you sent them to fetch tools from the barn. Jonah remembered you said no one goes near the barn alone. He barred the door. Jonah swallowed. They laughed. Mary continued. Then they tried the latch. I told the little ones to hide. They pushed at the door, but it held. One of them went around back. Peter and Samuel stacked the flour sacks by the pantry like you said to block that wall. The twins stood straighter, pale but proud. Rebecca touched their faces, one after the other, as if counting them by hand could prove they were real. Marshall Tate entered behind Elias. Where are the men now? Mary pointed toward the barn. One went inside. Queenie kicked him. Despite everything, Samuel whispered, hard. Peter added, very hard. Jonah found his voice. After that, they argued outside. Then one said Crow had been taken and they should clear out. They rode up toward the North Trail maybe half an hour ago. Elias looked at Marshall Tate. The marshal nodded. I'll send riders after them. Elias turned back to the children. His face had changed. The hard anger was still there, but under it was something that looked like awe. You held the house, he said. Jonah looked down. We were scared. So was I. The boy looked up sharply. Elias stepped closer and placed one hand on Jonah's shoulder. Courage does not mean you are not scared. It means the door stayed barred anyway. Jonah's eyes filled. Mary turned her face away, but Rebecca saw her tears. The house, though shaken, had held. The children had held. The family that the world called a burden had defended Black Pine Ridge with a poker, flour sacks, a barred door, and the stubborn courage of children who had already lost too much. If you have stayed with Rebecca and her children this far, tell me in the comments. Would you have opened the door, or would you have held it shut no matter who called your name? That evening, Marshall Tate inspected the yard, wrote notes, and took Jonah and Mary's account. He found tracks near the back wall, marks on the door, and a dropped glove by the barn, likely from the man Queenie had punished. Elias repaired the latch before dark and then walked the whole property line with the marshal. Rebecca stayed inside with the children. She fed them hot broth and bread. She washed soot from Jonah's cheek. She braided Mary's hair with a different ribbon from her own sewing basket. She let Ben sit in her lap until her legs went numb. The cabin had been invaded by fear. So she filled it with care until fear had less room to stand. When Elias returned after sunset, his face was grim but steadier. Marshall's riding back, he said. He will send men to watch the North Trail. And Crow still held if Tate has his way. Rebecca looked toward the children, now half asleep around the hearth. Will the judge believe us? Elias removed his hat slowly. He will believe the papers, the witnesses, the tracks, the filings. That is not what I asked. His eyes met hers. A tired silence passed between them. Then he said, I do not know. Rebecca looked down at her hands. They were red from scrubbing, cracked from cold, still shaking now that the danger had passed. Elias noticed. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, surprising her. From his coat pocket, he took a small tin of salve. For your hands, he said. She tried to smile. You carry hand salve. I carry what winter teaches a man to carry." He opened the tin and offered it to her. She reached for it, but he paused. "May I?" Rebecca's breath caught. It was only her hands. Only salve. Only a man kneeling by firelight, asking permission before touching what others had treated as common labor. She nodded. Elias took one hand gently in both of his. His palms were rough, warm, and careful. He smoothed the salve across her cracked knuckles with a tenderness that made her eyes burn. No one had touched her hands like they mattered in years. Not since before grief. Not since before hunger. She looked away because tears came too quickly. Elias stopped at once. "Did I hurt you?" "No," she whispered, "that is the trouble." He understood. She felt it in the stillness. From the hearth, Mary watched with soft eyes, pretending not to. Jonah had fallen asleep at last, one hand still near the poker. The twins snored lightly. Ruth and Annie leaned against each other. Ben's pinecone bird sat on the table beside the tiny brass key. Elias followed Rebecca's gaze to the key. "We ride back tomorrow for the hearing," he said. Rebecca nodded. "Together." Together. The word rested between them. Not as contract. Not as duty. As choice. Later, after the children slept and the cabin grew quiet, Elias stood before the hidden nursery door. He opened it, not all the way, just enough for firelight to spill inside. Rebecca came to stand beside him. The cradle sat in the soft glow. For the first time, it did not seem to accuse the house of silence. It seemed to wait. Elias spoke quietly. "I thought if I loved this house again, I would be betraying them." Rebecca looked at the cradle, then at the children sleeping near the hearth. "Maybe loving it again is how you keep them with you." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, grief remained. But it was not alone anymore. The next morning would bring court, law, crow's lies, and whatever power he still held in Mercy Crossing. The battle for Black Pine Ridge was not over. The final truth had not yet been spoken. But that night, as snow fell softly over the roof, and 7 children slept under Elias Boone's protection, Rebecca understood something that frightened and comforted her at once. She had come to the mountain to save her children. Somehow, without meaning to, she had also begun to save the man who saved them. Morning came clear over Black Pine Ridge, but it did not come peaceful. The snow had stopped during the night. Sunlight spilled across the valley, bright on the barn roof, bright on the fence rails, bright on the tracks left by fear the day before. Rebecca stood on the porch with her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders and watched Elias saddle Gideon. He moved with careful strength. His temple was bruised. One sleeve had been mended where the cloth tore on the ridge. His face was tired but not broken. Rebecca knew the difference now. A broken man hid from the truth. Elias Boone was riding toward it. Inside the cabin, the children were quiet over breakfast. Not the frightened silence from their first day, but the heavy silence of children who understood that grown-up matters could still reach through a door and take a home away. Mary buttered Ben's bread twice and did not notice. Jonah kept looking toward the fireplace poker as if he wished he could carry it into town. Peter and Samuel whispered about Queenie's brave kick, until Ruth told them court was not a place for cow stories. Annie looked at Rebecca with soft, worried eyes. "Will the judge send us away?" Rebecca knelt in front of her. "No judge gets to decide whether I love you." "That is not what I asked." Rebecca's heart pinched. Her children had learned too early that love and law were not always the same thing. She took Annie's small hands. "We have papers, we have witnesses, we have the truth, and we have each other. That is more than we had 2 days ago." Ben climbed into her lap without asking. "You promised you would fight hardest." Rebecca held him close, "And I am still fighting." Elias came to the doorway then. He had heard enough to make his eyes lower for a moment. When he looked up again, his voice was steady. "Mary Jonah, you remember the rules." Mary nodded. "Door barred, no barn without you. Little ones stay inside. If riders come, we hide and stay quiet." Jonah stood straighter. "And I keep the poker close." Elias looked at him. "Only if you need it." "I know." For a moment, Elias studied the boy. Then he removed the small hunting whistle from his coat pocket and handed it to him. Jonah stared at it. "Yours. For today." The boy's throat moved. "I'll bring it back." "I expect you to." It was a small thing, that whistle. Bone and cord, worn smooth from years of weather. But to Jonah it was trust made solid. Mary walked with Rebecca to the porch when it was time to go. The girl had braided her hair neatly with the new ribbon Rebecca had given her. She looked tired and brave and far too grown. "Mama," she whispered, "if they say we do not belong here, what will you do?" Rebecca looked back into the cabin, where 6 younger faces watched her with wide eyes. "I will tell them they are wrong." "What if they do not listen?" Rebecca brushed a loose strand from Mary's cheek. "Then I will keep speaking until someone does." Mary nodded, but tears filled her eyes. Elias stepped beside them, not too close. "Mary." She looked up. "This is your home until I come back." Her lips trembled. "Only until." His face softened in a way that made Rebecca's chest ache. "No," he said. "I meant while I am gone you guard it for us." "For us?" Mary heard it, so did Rebecca. The girl wiped her tears quickly and lifted her chin. "Then I will." The ride to Mercy Crossing felt different from the day before. Marshal Tate had sent 2 men to meet them at the lower trail, and they rode with Rebecca and Elias through the pass. No one spoke much. The air was sharp, the sun bright, the snow dazzling on the open slopes. The same land that had seemed threatening now looked like it was waiting for judgment too. Rebecca rode behind Elias again, one hand steady on his coat, the satchel pressed between them. Inside were the deed, the hidden letter, the survey, the false release, and the marriage papers that tied her children to Black Pine Ridge by more than hunger and luck. Halfway down the mountain, Elias spoke over his shoulder. "If the judge rules against me, I want you to take the children east of town. Miss Vale may help place you with a decent family." Rebecca stiffened. "Do not start giving me away before the hearing begins." "I am trying to make sure you have a path." "I have a path." "Rebecca." "My path is beside my children, and today it is beside you." He said nothing. So she continued, softer now. "You told me the first day that you were not selling dreams. You were offering survival." "I remember." "Well, survival is not enough anymore. Not after Mary guarded your door. Not after Jonah stood with a poker. Not after Ben stopped crying when he saw smoke from your chimney. Not after your wife asked you to fill that house with life." Elias' shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath. Rebecca tightened her hold just slightly. "We are not leaving because one thief learned how to write lies in a ledger." A long silence passed. Then Elias covered her hand with his for one brief moment. "All right," he said. That was all. But it felt like a vow. Mercy Crossing was already gathered when they arrived. Word had traveled faster than the wind. Men stood outside the courthouse. Women filled the boardwalks. Children peered from behind wagon wheels until their mothers pulled them back. The auction platform from 3 days before still stood near the square, its boards dusted with snow. Rebecca looked at it once. Only once. Then she turned away. She would not give that platform another piece of her soul. Inside the courthouse, the room smelled of wood smoke, wool coats, damp boots, and ink. Judge Alton Mercer sat at the front, a stern man with silver hair and tired eyes. Marshal Tate stood near the aisle. Mr. Adley, the clerk, had the ledger open on a side table. Silas Crow sat on a bench with one wrist bound, guarded by a deputy, but he still managed to look as if the room belonged to him. When Rebecca entered beside Elias, Crow smiled. "Mrs. Boone," he said, "still playing ranch wife." Elias took one step forward, but Rebecca stopped him with a touch to his sleeve. She looked at Crow calmly, still mistaking cruelty for strength. A few people murmured. Judge Mercer struck his gavel once. Enough. The hearing began with papers. So many papers. The original deed to Abigail Boone, the survey map, the letter from Elias' late wife's father, the hidden letter from Abigail's mother, the old recording entry, the release Silas Crow had filed claiming no surviving Boone heir, the new petition claiming Black Pine Ridge was abandoned. With every page read aloud, Crow's confidence thinned. Not gone. Thinned. He was not a fool. He had built his theft carefully, one quiet line at a time. He had used grief, silence, distance, and loneliness as tools. No guns had been needed for the worst of it, only ink and a county office willing to trust the wrong man. Judge Mercer looked over the release paper. "Mr. Crow, this document bears your signature." Crow leaned back. "I filed what I believed true." "You believed Elias Boone had no living household." "At the time, he did not." "You believed Abigail Boone's claim could be voided without notifying her father." Crow shrugged. The child was dead. A sound moved through the room. Rebecca felt Elias go still beside her. Judge Mercer's eyes hardened. A child being dead does not make forgery lawful. Crow's jaw tightened. Forgery is a strong word. "So is theft," the judge said, "yet here we are." The freight drivers gave their testimony next. They had seen Crow chase Rebecca. They had seen him reach for the satchel. They had heard her call the papers legal before he took them. Marshal Tate gave his account of the filings and the attack on the cabin. Mr. Adley admitted, with shame read across his face, that the release had never been properly checked. Then Mary and Jonah were called. Rebecca's heart clenched. She had hoped the children would not have to come, but Marshal Tate had ridden up with them and Miss Vale in a wagon just before the hearing began. Mary entered holding Jonah's hand. The younger children waited outside with Miss Vale, safe near the marshal's men. Mary looked small standing before the judge. But her voice did not break. She told him how men came to the cabin, how they claimed Elias had sent them, how Jonah remembered the rules, how the twins blocked the pantry wall, how they kept the door barred while someone tried to push it open. Jonah spoke after her, gripping Elias' whistle in one fist. "I was scared," he said, cheeks red. "But Mr. Boone told me courage means listening even when your hands shake, so I listened." Elias looked down. Rebecca saw his eyes shine. The judge's face softened just a little. "You did well, son." Jonah swallowed and nodded. Then Rebecca was called. The room shifted when she stood. She could feel the town looking at her, some with pity, some with shame, some with curiosity, a few with the same old judgment from the auction day. Rebecca walked to the front with her patched shawl over her shoulders and her hands still cracked from winter work. She did not look grand. She did not look delicate. She did not look like the kind of woman men wrote songs about. She looked like a mother who had endured. Judge Mercer leaned forward. "Mrs. Boone, tell the court what you know." Rebecca looked at the ledger, then at Crow, then at the people of Mercy Crossing. "I know what it feels like when a paper decides your children's fate," she said. The room went still. 3 days ago, I stood on a platform outside this very building while men decided whether 7 children were worth feeding. I heard them laugh. I heard them count our mouths like debts. I heard county officers say my children would be split if no man paid enough to keep us together. No one moved. Rebecca's voice remained steady, but every word carried the weight of the platform, the wind, and Ben's small cry. Elias Boone paid $300. Many of you thought he bought a burden. Some thought he bought labor. Some thought he bought shame, but he did not buy what he got. She turned slightly toward Elias. He got children who know how to hold a door against fear. He got a house filled with bread again. He got witnesses to the truth. He got a family that will not be broken by men who think loneliness is permission to steal. Elias' face changed. Rebecca looked back at the judge. Silas Crow did not only try to steal land. He tried to use grief as a hiding place. He counted on Elias Boone being alone. He counted on a dead woman staying silent. He counted on a dead child having no one left to speak her name. Her eyes moved to the deed. Her name was Abigail Boone. That valley was hers. Her mother wanted it used for life. I am asking this court to honor that truth. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Judge Mercer removed his spectacles and rubbed the bridge of his nose. When he looked up, his voice was firm. The court finds the release filed by Silas Crow invalid pending criminal review. The Abigail Boone parcel remains attached to the Boone estate. The abandonment petition against Black Pine Ridge is dismissed. Elias Boone's household is lawful, active, and witnessed. The clerk will correct the record today. Rebecca closed her eyes. The room erupted in whispers. Elias did not move at first. Then he bowed his head. Not in defeat. In release. Judge Mercer struck the gavel. As for Mr. Crow, he will remain in custody pending charges of false filing, attempted theft, intimidation, and conspiracy related to the attack on Black Pine Ridge. Crow shot to his feet. You cannot ruin me over a mountain hermit and a woman sold at auction. The room froze. Elias turned slowly. Rebecca did too. Before either could speak, Miss Harriet Vale rose from the back of the room. Her voice, usually tight and proper, rang with quiet force. That woman was not sold, she said. She was failed by every system that should have protected her. Crow's face twisted. Marshal Tate gripped his arm and forced him back down. Judge Mercer's gavel came down hard. Remove him. As Crow was led away, his eyes found Rebecca one last time. There was no charm left in him now, only bitterness. You think this makes you worth something, he hissed. Rebecca looked at him calmly. No, she said. I was worth something before any man here knew it. And for the first time, the town heard her. After the hearing, Mercy Crossing did not cheer. Real shame rarely makes noise at first. But people moved differently around Rebecca. The mercantile owner who had laughed at the auction took off his hat when she passed. Mr. Adley apologized twice and promised the corrected filings would be sealed before sunset. Miss Vale took Rebecca's hands and cried without hiding it. I should have done more, she whispered. Rebecca did not know how to answer that. Forgiveness was not a coin to hand out quickly, but she squeezed the woman's fingers once. Then do more for the next mother, she said. Miss Vale nodded through tears. By late afternoon, Elias and Rebecca rode home with the children in a wagon behind them, not as cargo, not as a burden, as a family returning to its roof. The sun was lowering when Black Pine Ridge came into view. Smoke rose from the chimney. The valley shone gold over white snow. The broken swing moved softly beneath the cottonwood. The barn stood steady. The cabin windows caught the light like warm eyes. Ben shouted first, home. The word flew across the valley. Home. Not shelter. Not contract. Not survival. Home. Elias pulled Gideon to a stop beside the porch. The children tumbled down, laughing and calling over one another. Jonah returned the whistle with great seriousness. Elias took it, then handed it right back. "Keep it," he said. Jonah's mouth fell open. Mary stood beside Rebecca and watched Elias with a look that said trust was still frightening, but no longer impossible. That evening, Rebecca cooked more food than they needed. Beans, bread, fried potatoes, and dried apples warmed in a pan with a little sugar Elias had been saving for no reason he would admit. The children ate until they were sleepy and smiling. Queenie bellowed from the barn as if demanding credit for saving the family. The twins insisted she deserved extra hay. Elias gave it to her. After supper, Elias did something no one expected. He opened the nursery door all the way. The children grew quiet. He carried out the small wooden horse with the broken wheel and placed it on the table. Then he brought the little blanket, shook the dust from it gently, and folded it near the hearth. Rebecca watched him with tears in her eyes. Mary whispered, "Was it hers?" Elias nodded, "Abigail's." Ben climbed down from his chair and touched the horse with one careful finger. "Can we fix it?" Elias looked at the broken wheel. Then at Rebecca. Then at the 7 children gathered around his table. "Yes," he said, voice rough, "I think we can." So they did. Jonah held the lantern. Peter and Samuel searched for a small peg. Ruth handed Elias the wrong tool twice. Annie sang softly under her breath. Mary watched Ben touch the repaired wheel with wonder. Rebecca stood beside Elias and held the horse steady while he worked. When the wheel turned again, the children clapped. Elias lowered his head, and for one silent moment, Rebecca knew he was hearing another child's laughter inside theirs. Grief had not vanished. It had simply made room. Later, when the children slept around the warm hearth because none of them wanted the loft that night, Rebecca stepped onto the porch. The stars were bright over Black Pine Ridge. Snow glowed beneath the moon. The broken swing hung still now, peaceful in the quiet. Elias came out and stood beside her. For a while neither spoke. Then he said, "My wife asked me to fill the house with life." Rebecca looked through the window at her children, sleeping in a tangled heap of blankets. Ben's pinecone bird resting near Abigail's wooden horse. "She knew you would need permission." His mouth tightened with emotion. "Maybe." Rebecca turned toward him, "And now?" He looked at her for a long moment. The hard lines of his face remained, but they no longer seemed like walls, more like scars on a man who had survived his own winter. "Now I want to try," he said. Rebecca's breath caught softly. He did not reach for her, did not rush, did not turn kindness into demand. He only stood there in the cold starlight and gave her the most honest thing he had. "A choice." Rebecca slipped her hand into his. His fingers closed around hers with careful strength. Below the porch, fresh snow covered the old tracks of fear. Tomorrow there would be chores, repairs, court papers to collect, fences to mend, children to feed, trust to build slowly day by day like stacking logs against another winter. But tonight, Black Pine Ridge was not a graveyard. It was a home with smoke in the chimney, bread on the table, children under quilts, and 2 wounded hearts standing side by side beneath the stars. Elias Boone had paid $300 because the world saw a burden. But what he brought home was courage. What Rebecca brought back was truth. And together, in a cabin once ruled by silence, they began a life no auction hammer, no cruel ledger, and no bitter man could ever take from them. Subscribe for more emotional Wild West stories where broken hearts find justice, families find home, and love grows slowly on the frontier. And long after Mercy Crossing forgot the price that was paid, Black Pine Ridge remembered the worth that had been proven. Not in gold, not in papers, but in the sound of 7 children laughing where sorrow used to live.